connecting why we would want to be healthy. And it's because, as I did for my whole life, up until recently, is you're always kind of fighting it, right? You're always kind of fighting it. You can be really healthy and go on little runs of being unhealthy, and the ripple effect of the decisions that you make in those little runs can last years. Like you can make a bad decision on an unhealthy run that could end up affecting you for a very long time into the future, versus when you continually make decisive, sound, smart decisions, how that compounds your life into a much more positive direction on a continual basis. And there's so many things that contribute to it that all are interwoven, that lead to the feeling that you have in that present moment to make that decision that you're faced with at that time and what you're going to do. Are you going to work out? Are you going to meditate? Or are you going to get Taco Bell and, and get one too many tacos, maybe some nachos Bel Grande? Okay. And hey, I'm going off the rails a little bit. Maybe I'll get myself a nice sugary Dr. Pepper and then go sit on the couch for 4 hours. You made that decision. And that's a very easy decision not to make when you have just worked out all week and got up early and got great night's sleep and ate clean all week. When you're tempted to hit the Taco Bell, that's the closest fast food restaurant to your house, not a mere mile away, nothing more than a 4-minute trip to that delightful, built to just fatten you up and sedate you Taco Bell. Okay, slather you, slather you with fattiness. You don't make that decision when you've been compounding good decisions and are healthy and eating right and meditating and working out and all of these things. In that the same way, if you were scattered and eating Taco Bell 2 or 3 times a week, and then your wife hits you with like, I just wish like we talked more. What are you gonna say to that one when you got your when you're wiping nacho cheese off your lips? You're gonna be like, I've had a crazy week. You just don't understand like everything that's going on. You know what I mean? Like I've just been going thing, and it's not like your week was your normal week, but because you were unhealthy and had a handful of like things that you knew you shouldn't have done along the way that compounded to the moment it's affecting somebody else in your life. When you're challenged with, I just wish like you shared more with me or whatever, you feel attacked because you're just already feeling unhealthy. And then boom, you make the decision to engage, to say some things that now you're going to regret for a period of time, that's going to drain energy from you and make things, your overall quality of life, much lower. It's that sort of compound effect of what happens in being unhealthy that people just overlook, as opposed to just not looking as good as you used to. And to me, um, it's the other side of it is making better and better decisions that lead to a higher and higher quality of energy and ultimately higher quality of life when you're super healthy. And there's just so many different ways to continually get healthier and healthier. And we live in this world where like, our chance at being healthy at peak healthiness is when we're younger. And the funny thing is as we get older, we always like look back at like, oh man, like I thought I was gonna feel so old in my 30s. I was like so young. It's like when you're in your 20s, you feel like your arc is like your basic health arc peaks at like 23, and at 28 you're basically old. And at 30, you're going to be a mess and the pain start kicking in. And like you make a decision sometime in your 30 that, well, that's it. I'm just going to fade out to the end here and slowly get unhealthier till the day that I die. That's the paradigm that we live in. And a lot of people discover fitness and start tracking sleep and start doing their diet and get more focused later in life and begin to see the benefits and see that, like, wow, I can really affect so many different more aspects of my life as it relates to being healthy on a deeply consistent basis. But we tend to just tie it to how we look and feel as opposed to the type of decisions that we are making and how those decisions are actually impacting the quality of our life and how we actually feel energetically, and it's a nonstop thing. For me, the paradigm of like at heading into 50, I should be thinking like, hey, let's just try to maintain it. Like I believe at this point, it's hard for me to believe that I'm not going to get healthier and healthier. Till I'm like right now, it's like if I'm being 100% honest, there's no part of me that does not think that I'm not going to get healthier to 80. There's a part of me that thinks like, man, you might be able to stretch this thing out to 100, and that's because a lot of compounding factors, but one is the depth of knowledge that I now have of what it means to be healthy, understanding how the entire system of my body works, understanding all the muscles, the neurology, understanding all my blood work, all of the all aspects, and most recently doing CT scans of my heart and full body MRIs to look inside the entirety of how the body is functioning. I recently got an MRI of all my muscles so I understand all the muscle densities so I can rebalance all of my muscles. And now I've been in this state of purity as it relates to not drinking and no sugar and intermittent fasting and eating light meals. Like, man, there is just no part of me that does not believe that I'm not going to get healthier and healthier and healthier forever, that I'm going to get like happier and happier, that I'm going to get wealthier and wealthier, wiser and wiser. It's a different paradigm. And it's because of the depth of understanding that I have of myself, my world, and ultimately the way that I am reacting to everything that's happening to me and the decisions that I am making that continue to guide my existence towards all aspects of using the maximum that I can of this human experience to live it at a very high level. And it's a deeper like contribution. Health is giving a much deeper contribution to my quality of life beyond just what it's doing for me on how I look and feel. It truly is giving me a much sharper mind to make better decisions on, to continually assess for friction in my existence and friction in the systems that I can continually optimize the whole so that I'm getting healthier, not just in the physical sense, but in the mental sense as well, in all aspects of my life. That leads to this higher quality of living, which truly keeps me in this state of being overwhelmed with gratitude and just continually in awe of like, I get to live this life. That's how it feels. Like, and it's not for a podcast or a video. It is like an incredible way to exist. And half the mission is codifying it into a system that people can replicate so they can get to the same feeling. And this show is really parts of that as I experience them and articulate them as it relates to what I am experiencing by getting to this state. And I promise you, your commitment to health and sleeping well and eating right and working out and meditating and doing all of these things that if you did, you would feel better, look better, and be happier. But you will also be making better decisions on an ongoing basis that are protecting yourself from leading you the wrong path and guiding you towards a better, higher quality future, which is truly what we all want to play the game for. And it is possible, and you can do it because I'm living proof. But how did I do it? You know how I did it? I looked out in the future. I said, man, this is how I've got to make this thing happen. Then I created that plan and strategy to do it. And then I evolved into it over time, and I never stopped pushing until I got there. Until next time, see it, believe it, do it. Today's episode, it isn't about living that harmonious, high quality life. It is about developing the greatness mindset with none other than the Ohio legend, Lewis Howes. Welcome to Build with Rob. It's your boy Rob Dyrdek. We got a very, very special episode today. Forget about preaching all my normal stuff of ranting about pushing everything into automation and time, energy, and mind share mastery, and pushing everything to the human optimization level. I got a human optimization high output brother of mine, Ohio family, the one and only Lewis Howes. Welcome to the show.
My man. Thanks, Rob. Good to see you, brother.
Look, we have you on here today. We haven't really been doing guests lately. It's just me kind of talking about philosophy and everything that I'm learning. But you have a new book coming out, and we spoke, and you're like, hey, I really, really would love to come on and talk to you about the book that I've created. And I said, then you get me that book, and let's understand it and get into it. So, first of all, it's an amazing book. Congratulations on getting another one done. Obviously, you are already a New York Times bestseller. This is coming right behind it. You have your podcast that's, obviously one of the biggest podcasts in the space that's been changing millions of people's lives, which ultimately is the vision for the strategies and the mindset that you've created that you're now sharing with people in this book. So if you could lay out just sort of the book itself and the vision you have for the book.
Well, I think most of my life, I wanted to be successful. That was the goal. How do I gain as much success, and how do I accomplish my goals and dreams? And I kind of thought about it at all costs. I'll work harder than anyone. I'll work longer hours. I'll wake up earlier, whatever it takes to achieve success. First, it was in sports. And then when the sports ended, it was how do I do this in life, in business, and other areas? And when I hit 30 years old, right before I started the School of Greatness podcast, I realized that success on its own wasn't enough. And I realized that I was doing something wrong. Something was missing inside of me. This is something I've talked about with you over the years since I've known you. And it wasn't fulfilling me to the point where I felt like I was joyful, happy, and in alignment with my highest self. And as I started studying greatness, I realized that success by itself was selfish, and greatness is about actually pursuing your goals and dreams and then empowering and lifting others up around you, creating a win-win experience, not just a win-lose experience, making sure that you are impacting the people around you in a positive way as well. And I think I just was unconscious for so long about be successful so that I could prove others wrong, so that I could look good, so that I could be right, so that I could get acknowledged, whatever it might be. And I really needed to go through kind of an ego death and eliminate that, because it was allowing me to get big results in my life, but it wasn't allowing me to feel fulfilled internally. And that's why these last 10 years has been the research of understanding this in practical terms and science terms. And the podcast just hit our 10-year anniversary last week, right? 10 years, every single week, showing up, growing, learning, making mistakes, trying stuff, figuring it out, and learning from the best. People like yourself, people like world-class athletes, neuroscientists, doctors, you name it. And I realized that there was a common through line of the greats, and that is they want others around them to be successful as well. It's not just for them. True fulfillment is making an impact and seeing others succeed as well. And so that's the crux of it. The book is really about helping you identify the thing that holds you back the most and feeling that way and experiencing that experience. And I believe my thesis is self-doubt is the killer of all dreams.
Mm.
When we doubt ourselves, we make poor decisions, or we don't make decisions at all. We don't act, or we act out of alignment of our highest selves. And so the goal is to figure out how to embrace the self-doubt and overcome the fears that hold you back from doubting yourself. And that's kind of where the book begins, figuring out what is your clear, meaningful mission, and then the enemy to greatness, which is one of these things that causes you to doubt yourself.
Yeah, and look, and to me, what I love about your mission is, look, you understand it. You know what I mean? It's like you lived it,
Mhm.
you grew into it.
Yeah.
Then your process of understanding how great mind thinks and discovering these through lines was actually through growing and evolving your own self and business at the same time. So, to me, when I think about the greatness mindset, it is like the inevitable output of all of your entire journey, right?
Yes.
In the book that has always meant to be written, right?
Yes.
And what I found the most like interesting in the way that you approached it is, boy, this thing is tactical.
Very.
You know what I mean? Like I was blown away by like, hey, forget about, hey, there's these great stories in here. And I
Yeah.
really looked at like, you've interviewed literally, the most elite human beings that there are, right?
Mhm.
On so many different ranges and levels. So your insight's so deep. But boy, oh boy, do you give actual deeply specific tools
Mhm.
for people to use to actually achieve this
Yeah.
mindset? And what led you to like, hey, I want to make this super, super tactical? What led
I,
to that?
I struggled in school most of my life, and I couldn't understand things that were written in books. It was hard for me to understand school books, and so I struggled. So I thought to myself, what is the book that I could have picked up and consume at 13 that I could understand? What is the book at 21 when I'm struggling in transition from sports to figuring out my life? What will be the thing that would have guided me then? What's the thing at 30 when I was in breakdown mode in relationship and business and internally struggling? What's the thing that would have guided me? What's the exact steps I need with the stories and research and science that backs the stories from all walks of life, not just athletes, but the billionaires, the neuroscientists, the therapists, everyone in between? And what's the book that I need now to keep me on track? And what's the book that I'm going to need in 10 years when I step into a new season and new situations in life come about and new adversities and eventually become married and become a father? And that, what does that look like with that type of pressure and insecurity stepping into that season? This will be the exact guide I'll use then and the guide I wish I had back then.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's really 10 years of research, application, and and being the guinea pig of what works
Yeah.
and simplifying as much as I can, because I just believe that the mind and the emotions can be extremely complicated. And we weren't taught as kids how to manage them, navigate them, understand them, accept them. And so we do things to self-soothe in destructive ways that aren't our highest selves. And the goal is, how do we get to a place of feeling as much inner peace and inner alignment, which I know you talk about a lot, aligning yourself, being as efficient as possible. But if we are distracted internally, mentally, and emotionally, then we're going to make poor decisions and be destructive externally. And so the goal is, how do we stay as clear and concise as possible under chaos,
Yeah.
so that
Yeah.
even though you're not going to be able to control the external environment, you might control your physical space, but you're not going to control the world or what people do or say. But when the critics are coming after you, when there is craziness happening around you, can you stay calm on the inside? And I said to myself, the only way you can stay calm is if you are clear on your meaningful mission. And most people do not know what their mission is in one sentence.
Yeah.
Mine is to serve 100 million lives every single week to help them improve the quality of their life. That's it.
Yeah.
And so I make decisions and I go in a direction that serves that mission. Does every decision I make work? No, but at least I know where I'm heading. And there's a lot of people who have no clue where they're heading, and then they just kind of wander and circle, and they get, they're in no man's land. You see this with Army vets. They have a clear mission when they're in service in the military. When they come home, there's lots of great programs if they use them, but some of them don't have a mission anymore, and some can be very destructive because they're not sure, what do I do now? We must be getting clear on what our season is and what our mission is during that season of life. And then when we can go into the next phase, okay, now I'm clear. But if I don't even know what that season is or what my mission is, we'll give you the steps in the book on how to do that and really to discover these things. You may be in a season of trying a lot of different things to see what works. But once you get clear on your mission, there's going to be barriers to accomplishing it. And that comes down to overcoming the self doubt, the fear of failure, success, or judgment. One of these three fears most people have in their life or they have had in their life. And at the center, the root of each one of these fears is I am not enough. I'm not smart enough, talented enough, old enough, skilled enough, beautiful enough, whatever it is. I'm not worthy enough. Whatever this self doubt is, it causes us to delay. It causes us to question. It causes us to not step into the next action. And that's what holds us back. And so, if we can understand the process of overcoming that and mending the wounds of the past, mending the pain that causes us to doubt and create new meaning from it, that's when we can overcome it and step into the greatness.
Yeah, I mean, I even as you just push it, you know what I'm saying? It's this man's mastery of even laying out and from knowing the book, he's laying out the structure of essentially what you can practice in a tactical way. So
Mhm.
not only is he sort of laying out like this journey for you of like you need to end up in that mission, you
Mhm.
need to overcome these fears, like in order to create your greatness plan, right? To
Mhm.
to heal from your past and find your identity. This is the
Yeah,
framework of this book. And I'm telling everybody that's listening is that there are pure exercises that you can go through to make this discovery within yourself, and all the way through the entire book, like describing sort of these different sort of things that you need to go through from a self discovery
Mhm.
standpoint, and then giving you lessons or techniques on how to do it yourself.
Yes.
And that to me, especially when you said the idea of like season versus, you said season a couple times, which
Yes.
it's something that's I don't think is often hasn't been spoken about enough in the space,
Yes.
where it's like everybody's not the same and everybody's life isn't the same, but the season that you're in is different in different times, and your wants, needs, desires, and who you've
They
evolved
shift.
into changes, right?
Yeah,
And
before you became a husband and a father, you were on a different mission.
that's it. That's it.
And your mission evolved with marriage, with being a husband, with being a father. It didn't completely change for you, but it said, okay, let me get focused even more and add this to the mission.
Right. And the world's evolving, you're evolving, but I
Yes.
love this idea that if you use this as a tool, that you can always go back to
100%.
using it as a
At
tool.
every season and every stage of life.
That's it. And to me, I think that's already how I approach like the timeless works that matter to me. When I read Think and Grow Rich again,
Yes.
it's always like I've never read it.
I know.
You know what I mean? It's like all these I read Good to Great recently. It was like as if I never even read it. It changed my life at the time and gave me this incredible perspective. But reading it again, it's like at this entirely new stage and new
Mhm.
way of looking at it. I'm like, wow, this is way more like deep and has way more science to it that I couldn't even
Yeah.
appreciate at the time. So that's what I love, about, you know, creating something timeless like
Yes.
this from that perspective. But I would like to go a little bit deeper into the philosophy of some of these core attributes, especially, this idea of the meaningful mission, right? Like
Mhm.
you it's so important, you've identified it, you've locked in on it.
Yeah.
It's like, why Why do you think that that is the hardest one for people to find, right? And you think about even like you use the military example, but it's like it's in sports. You know what I
Everything,
mean?
man.
Like there's so many different things when you
Yeah.
have attached your who you are to your purpose, and then something pulls the rug out from
Yeah.
under you. It's that like standing at square one
Hmm.
is so difficult. And why do you think that is so hard for people to find that in the first place?
I think it's hard to find because well, a lot of it is we question ourselves. We question why we're here in the first place. This is the human existence. When I was a kid, I was like, who am I? Why am I here? Why is this happening to me? When bad things would happen, I didn't understand it. So I didn't know the meaning of my existence, of why I was here in the first place. So you're just curious walking around the world trying to just model from your parents, see what's happening out with your siblings, and say, well, what's the purpose of all of this? It's all a self discovery of a journey of understanding why we exist. So that's kind of just a big, heavy question to answer for each individual. And it wasn't until I said, okay, I'm here for a reason. Let me figure out what this reason is. As a kid, it was, let me lean into sports because it's what I'm good at and it's what I'm curious about. So when you're discovering what your meaningful mission is, I talk about the three P's. The first one is the passion. These are your interests. What is curious for you and something that you might be interested in, and just explore that space for a while. For me, that was sports. After a period of time of just confusion, I found out I was interested in this. So let me lean into that. The second P is your power. Okay, I'm tall. I saw that I had some coordination. I have some talents and skill set around sports. Let me lean into that as well and see if I like it. So I'm using my power along with my passion, my curiosity. But the second part of the power is figuring out where you are the most powerless
Mm.
and making that something that you overcome in your journey. So creating a list of all your insecurities and fears at each season and knocking the fears off the list by diving all the way into the fear and making it a new talent of yours, not something that you're insecure about, but a new talent. So figuring out your power and the things that make you powerless and making them a superpower. And the third one is finding a problem that you want to solve at different seasons. Um, so for me, my friend Rory Vaden said, you are perfectly positioned to help the person you once were before. So, I was struggling and I was broke and I was trying to figure out how to overcome self doubt. And then I went on a journey of doing that. And now I'm perfectly positioned to help someone in that position now, right? Now that I have that experience, if someone loses 100 pounds, they're perfectly positioned to help someone else with that same pain at this season of life. So when we figure out those three P's, we can get clearer on the direction we want to go. My first interview was with Robert Greene, the great Robert Greene,
For this your
with my
podcast
podcast 10
initially?
years ago.
Wow.
My first episode was Robert Greene about 48 laws of power and everything else. And he gave me a great story on this because I said to him, did you always know that you were going to write these type of books? He goes, I had no clue. I knew I was a talented writer and I was curious about writing. So he knew his passion was writing, he was curious about it, and he was talented. So he moved to LA. He was like a newspaper writer first, tried that for a couple of years, didn't love it. Then he tried like TV writing, didn't really like working with other people in a TV room. Then he tried movie script writing, he tried magazines, he tried all these different things around writing. And he kept bouncing around in this exploratory phase to try to figure out what was his thing. He didn't like any of it. Then he said, you know what? I really like this concept of writing this kind of weird, quirky style of nonfiction book. I think he even tried to write like novels. He didn't really like that either. But he's like, I'm really curious about this topic and I want to write it in a specific way. And he pitched it to publishers and they didn't like it. They all kind of were like, it's weird. It's different than what every
Is
other
this the
book.
48
40
laws?
of Power, yeah.
Wow.
I think that was the first one.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of structured in a certain way and it's formatted weird. And it's like, this is kind of like, are people going to dig this? Like
Right.
the
Is it
publishers.
48?
Yeah,
Most
yeah.
of these are 7 to
Yeah,
10.
7 to 10 chapters. And you're like,
Yeah.
and it was just kind of a unique way of writing and packaging it that the publishers didn't understand. But he believed in it so much that he finally got a publisher to say yes. And it was like, boom, this hit. So it was like years of exploring his talents and his uniqueness and his curiosity around something, writing, to where he finally figured out, okay, this is the thing. And then hit after hit after hit, going all in on that thing. And that became his meaningful mission, part of this process. And so I think we need to go through a season of struggle or figuring it out or trying things if it doesn't come so naturally to us. Some people like yourself, you're just a gifted skateboarder. You just figured it out right away, I guess, but it took you challenge and struggle. And then you had to go into the next thing. Well, I want to try this with entertainment too. Let me explore TV and let me try this. And then you get to where you are now.
But think about it. For me, it was and it's why it resonates with me is you can start with your passion, but if
Yeah.
you don't have any power in that passion,
Mhm.
it could actually drive a lot of that powerlessness feeling.
If you
And
weren't
then
talented,
yeah, and
you
but
wouldn't have gotten there.
and then like you have a passion, and let's say you have a power, but you have the wrong problem you're trying to solve or
Right.
connected to. It's there's a lot of similarity in even business too.
There's a quote out there. I can't remember who says this, and I'm paraphrasing the quote, but there's something like, one of the worst things you can do is win at the wrong things.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like if you have the talent, the power and the passion, but you're solving the wrong problem and
yeah.
you're making money, but it's not really fulfilling you at the highest level, then you're kind of winning you're putting your effort and energy on the wrong things.
Yeah. And look, and I look at it's this ever evolving chase,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? When you look at it through that lens. And even for me, where I feel like I'm in this sort of rapid evolution, that I'm still continually looking towards what do I really want to do? And what do I love to do? And what excites me? And what am I best at? And then what's the biggest problem I can solve? It's
Mhm.
like, it's almost like I keep adjusting what that
Yes.
is based off of the success that I have in the season that I
Seasons,
enter.
man. It's all about seasons.
Because think about it, like I transitioned to a season when I went from self-preservation to generational preservation,
Yes.
right? Created like generational wealth, had a family. Like it completely shifted even what I understood about the impact that I could even make on the world beyond
Mhm.
just being successful. You know
Exactly.
what I mean?
Exactly.
And that's it's a
Yeah.
really interesting, again, back to how tactical the book is and how you could apply those three P's
Mhm.
like over and over depending on your situation to just get clarity within yourself.
Exactly. Get clarity. And when I was, back in the great state of Ohio, sleeping on my sister's couch for a year and a half, I was in a season of, how do I just survive? How do I make enough money to go get my own apartment? I got my first apartment for $495 a month in Columbus. And I felt like, okay, I finally after a year and a half of struggling and making no money, I finally made some and I'm in my own apartment. Now, what's this season of life? Let me look beyond that. Let me get enough savings for 6 months. It was just like, okay, once you can go beyond that, you can see farther once you've taken care of yourself first. So it's just being aware of the season and always being in reflection. And that's why I love the sports analogy of just like, okay, once the season's done, Tom Brady just retired.
Hmm.
He had a few weeks to reflect and he said, okay, I'm finally done. And once to complete the mission of your season, you get to ask yourself, do I want to do this again for the next season and the next season? And eventually it's going to evolve and shift and change. And so that's why it's important to take time to reflect and check in with yourself and see, am I doing what I need to do for this season, or do I need to find a new mission?
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I think, um, you get better at discovering your meaning too.
Yes.
You understand all the parts of what is actually your meaningful mission, gets more dynamic as you evolve and gets
Mm-hmm.
more clear to you as you experience and try different things. Let's move on to the barriers of greatness, right?
Yes.
I love the idea of like, sort of these core failures that everybody faces, but or core fears that
Yes.
everybody faces. But what really is interesting to me is, okay, failure. Everybody is like, that's the ominous one
Yes.
of like, hey, why if I even make this try, if it doesn't work, like that's the
Yep.
one that'll build the foundation of self doubt. I think secondary is the judgment of like what if I don't? What's everybody gonna say? For me in Ohio, it's my uncle saying, he's gonna get a job like the rest of us. You know what I mean? Like this pro skateboarding thing's never gonna be a thing. It's not a real job. And it's even though I was
Shopify helps you sell at every stage of your business. Like that ready to launch. Welcome to the Huberman Lab podcast, where we discuss science and science-based tools for everyday life. I'm Andrew Huberman, and I'm a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford School of Medicine. Today, my guest is Rick Rubin. Rick Rubin is credited with being one of the most creative and prolific music producers of all time. The range of artists with whom he's worked with and discovered is absolutely staggering, ranging from artists such as LL Cool J, Public Enemy, Minor Threat, Fugazi, Beastie Boys, Jesus and Mary Chain, Jay-Z, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Metallica, Green Day, Tom Petty, System of a Down, Joe Strummer, Kanye West, Johnny Cash, Adele, and many, many more. Not surprisingly, therefore, Rick is considered somewhat of an enigma. That is, people want to know how it is that one individual is able to extract the best creative artistry from so many different people in so many different genres of music. Well, as today's discussion reveals, Rick's expertise in the creative process extends well beyond music. In fact, our conversation takes us into the realm of what the creative process is specifically and generally across domains, including music, of course, but also writing, film, science, and essentially all domains in which new original thought, ideas, and production of anything becomes important. Our conversation ventures from abstract themes, such as what is creativity and where does it stem from, to the more concrete, everyday tool-based approaches to creativity, including those that Rick himself uses and that he's seen other people use to great success. That took us down some incredible avenues, ranging from a discussion about the subconscious to how the subconscious interacts with our conscious mind and how the subconscious and conscious mind interact with nature around us and within us. Indeed, our conversation got rather scientific at times, but all with an eye and an ear toward understanding the practical tools that any and all of us can use in order to access the creative process. We also spent some time talking about Rick's new book, which is all about creativity and ways to access creativity. The title of the book is The Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rick Rubin. This is a book that I've now read 3 times from cover to cover, and I'm now reading it a 4th time because it is so rich with wisdom and information that I'm very well could be gone. And great to have you here today, Rick.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So of all the topics in science, and in particular in neuroscience, I confess that creativity is the most difficult one to capture because you can find papers, scientific studies, that is, on convergent thinking versus divergent thinking, and there are definitions to these. I mean, they take on different forms, but in a strict definition form, it seems that creativity has something to do with either rearranging existing elements or coming up with new elements. But as I went into your book, which I've done twice, I've read it twice, and by the way, I feel so blessed and honored to have gotten an early copy from you, or a final copy early, that is. But having gone through it twice, I'm now convinced that there may not actually be an internal source of creativity that exists on its own, right? And the example that you give that for me really is serving as an anchor, and tell me if I'm wrong here, is this idea that ideas and creativity are a little bit like a cloud. If you look at it at one moment, you might think that it looks like one thing, where it has a certain shape and texture, but then you look at it a moment later, it could be quite a bit different. And if you look at it an hour later, it
going from survival mode my whole life to having enough money to like take my kids on vacation.
that for me really is serving as an anchor, and tell me if I'm wrong here, is this idea that ideas and creativity are a little bit like a cloud. If you look at it at one moment, you might think that it looks like one thing, where it has a certain shape and texture. But then you look at it a moment later, it could be quite a bit different. And if you look at it an hour later, it very well could be gone. And the reason I think that serves as such a powerful hook for me to think about creativity, and why I think neuroscientists and scientists in general have never actually captured a way to even talk about creativity, stems from somebody that you knew in person, but that, as you know, I greatly admire. I don't have many heroes, but I would put Joe Strummer among the short list of heroes that I have. And I remember once an interview with him, fairly disjointed. He was sort of, off in different tangents that I couldn't follow. But at one point, he just kind of blurted out that if you have an idea, you have to write it down. And you may end up throwing it away, but if you wait, it will be gone. And I remember that, and as a consequence, I have a whole system that I use to try and capture ideas. But what are your thoughts on what Joe said, this cloud idea that comes up in one form in one area of the book, but then I think is thread throughout the book in different ways? How did that come to you, and how does it serve you in trying to, I don't want to say extract, but trying to access creativity?
I think the best way to think about it is like a dream. It's like if you think about your dreams, they don't necessarily make sense. When you wake up, you might remember part, but not the whole thing. Then if you start writing them down, they'll come back, and they may not make sense to you. There'll be a series of abstract images, and maybe someday in the future you'll be able to look back and understand what they mean, and maybe not. And that's sort of how the art making process works. Is like we're making things and we're looking for a feeling in ourselves, and it could be a feeling of excitement or enthusiasm, a feeling of interest, a feeling. There's something here. There's something here. I want to know more. I want to know more. I want to know more. And but I'll say it's not an intellectual process. It's a different thing. That's why it's hard even to talk about it, because it's so elusive,
Recently, I was listening to a podcast by our friend Lex Friedman.
Yeah.
I think it was an episode with Balaji Srinivasan, where with Balaji, who's a investor type guy, thinker type guy. This is like an 8-hour episode. He says something at the beginning that I'd love your thoughts on. He said, look, we can train a rat to lever press every other time, or to expect reward on every even number press, or every odd number press, or even every fifth number press. But a human and a rat can't do that for like prime number presses. You can't actually train that. And then you think about the reward systems and the way that we follow life from when we get up until we go to sleep. And what he said is the fact that we can't do that means that we may not actually be in touch with the best schedules of doing things. Like every time I'm thirsty, I take a sip. I assume that's the right way to do it, but it might not be optimal, right? Optimal for whatever purpose. When I was reading your book, I was thinking about there's a set of things to follow, things to pay attention to. You talk about this, things to access, that none of the creative process comes from just within us. It can, but it's always being fed by things outside of it. And so what I started to do is the second time I read through the book was think about it through the lens of what Balaji was saying, was that there may not even be a language for this thing that we call accessing creativity. I mean, there's a process, but that language in the form of words is a little bit like trying to use even numbers to try and access prime numbers.
Yes.
Like the math becomes so convoluted that we end up in a conversation like this where I'm confident we can get to the kernels of it, because what's remarkable about the book is that you show and inform the process. But there may not be a English or any other language for saying do this, then this, then this, then this, and you'll have something of creative value.
Yeah.
Does that capture it?
Yes, I think language is insufficient to drill down on creativity. It's more, it's closer to magic than it is science.
How to get the most of Grammarly free.
It's Kayla on behalf of Grammarly to tell you all about the free version of the best communication assistant in the world. Millions have chosen to go beyond their default grammar checkers and use Grammarly. My cousin Izzy, a graphic designer, is one of them. Izzy loves how quick and reliable Grammarly is at providing feedback. Another reason Izzy signed up for Grammarly is its conciseness suggestions, something she wasn't getting from default grammar checkers. Grammarly notices wordiness and helps her rephrase this hard-to-read sentence with one click. Izzy also wants to feel like her tone is on point, so she uses Grammarly's tone detector to show how a reader may understand her writing. Here, Izzy's email is optimistic, friendly, and admiring. Izzy sends the email confident that it's mistake-free, concise, and on target. And what did it cost her? All of it was free.
Download for free at Grammarly.com.
So when kids come into the world, do you think that they have better access to this creative process than we do as adults? Because we start to impart rule plays and books like Will It Get Likes? Will people like it? But also like all the things that are available to us that we're not paying attention to, like the texture of this table, right? We're discarding things kind of systematically. We get quote unquote set in our ways. Do you think kids are just by definition and by design more creative than adults?
Yes, kids they're open and they have no baggage. They don't have any belief system. They don't know how things are supposed to work. They just see what is. And if we pay attention to what is, we learn much more than if we, most of us select from an endless number of data points available to us as a species, to make sure that we don't die and to procreate and to feed ourselves are probably the primary functions first. And then we learn things about what's right and what's wrong, and we learn things about how to do certain things, or we're inspired by someone who makes something we love and we want to do it the way they do it. And all of those things undermine the purity of the creative process. They can be tools to build your skill set to be able to do it yourself. Like if you're a singer, you might imitate a singer you really like for a while to get good at it, and then eventually come to find your own voice. It doesn't always start with your own voice. But if you're 3 years old or 5 years old and you try singing, you're not singing like anyone else. You're singing with your own voice. And when you make something, you're making it based on not knowing. And I think I had the advantage early in my career of starting making music without any experience, which was helpful because I didn't know what rules I was breaking. And so it wasn't intentional breaking of rules. I just did what seemed right to me. But I didn't realize that I was doing things that other people wouldn't do.
I mean, there is this idea that there are no new ideas. You know, I sort of disagree, because every once in a while I'll see or hear something that at least seems different enough.
I think it's a combination of a new combination of existing ideas presented in a new way. I think that's how it works. I don't know. But I will say it does seem like the things that are most interesting to me have a series of familiar elements joined together in a way that it's creating something that I've never seen before.
You mentioned that it's that when you are close to or you see hints of creativity that is of real value, that you can that it's a feeling. And I also believe that the body is a great source of information. I mean, which once people realize that the brain, of course, is in the skull, but the nervous system extends everywhere in the body, the whole mind-body thing just falls away. Philosophers have argued about this forever, but it's a silly argument. It's also true that, if, God forbid, I were to amputate all my limbs, have them amputated, I'd fundamentally still be me. Right. The same is not true if we took a big enough chunk of my brain and I still survived, I would be fundamentally different human being. I'd still have the same name and identity and social security number, but I would behave very differently. Who knows, maybe better. The signals from the body, we know, or at least we assume, are pretty generic. Like, I can think of 50 different ways or 100 ways that we could talk about creativity today, and we could define it and redefine it and carve it up and serve it up like sushi in a bunch of different ways. But the body sends signals that most of us we have a kind of coarse understanding of. It's like, oh, my stomach hurts, or my stomach feels good, or I'm not sensing my stomach, or oh, that feels good. It feels warm. It feels cold. Like, most of us aren't trained in understanding how to interpret those signals. So it's almost like you have a few vowels, a few syllables, and there isn't a lot more. Whereas when we talk about our thoughts and our experiences, depending on how hyperverbal somebody is and how much emphasis they put on different sounds, it's kind of near infinite, right? Not infinite, but near infinite. So for you personally, when you know that you're on the end of a thread of creativity, maybe you're listening to an artist, or you're hearing something, and you're like there, and your antennae start to deflect in a certain way, right? Do you feel that in your body as a recognizable sensation, or is it a thought and a sensation?
It's a feeling in my body.
Is it localized?
No, it's a feeling of I would say it's like a surge of energy.
Do you remember the first time you experienced that?
Probably, hearing the Beatles when I was 3 or 4 years old.
3 or 4 years old?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Is there something wrong with me that the Beatles have never done it for me?
No, maybe you just weren't exposed at the right time in the right way. There's no right or wrong way. And everyone, I can love the Beatles and you cannot, and we're both right. There's not
okay. I'm glad we can still be friends. I was a little concerned. I was a little scared to ask you that question. I know my taste in music is a little bit obscure, but and kind of fragmentary. But okay, good. I've always felt like, gosh, there must be something wrong with me. I like their songs, but there's no juice for me there.
I think maybe we'll watch. There was an 8-part series called The Beatles Anthology, which is out of print, but I can try to find it somewhere and we can watch that together. And
okay.
Maybe that'll make the case for the Beatles.
Okay. Yeah, but I mean, nothing against them. It's just, and I'm always bothering you for story, but like Ramones, I saw that and I was like, wow, like Gene's Aviators, everyone had to change their last name to Ramone. A lot of them hated each other. Yeah. There's so much drama in there and 3 chords but to me, it just was like, wow, like kids from New York, that energy. So I think different things for different people, right?
Absolutely.
So that brings me to a question of when something feels creatively right and you're sensing it and you're there, let's say in the studio, or maybe even you're listening to something that somebody sent you. How do you translate that, given the absence of language? How do you translate that into a conversation with the artist? And again, this could be about writing or comedy or or science or podcasting for that matter. How do you say that, keep going that way, when they might not even recognize that they did it? And I'm guessing a lot of times they don't.
Yeah, sometimes they don't. It depends. When we're I'll try to be in a setting where, as we're talking about it, we can engage with it in that moment. So it's not much good let's say I was producing your new record and you played me something and I had some thoughts about it, it wouldn't be so helpful for me to tell you what those were. It'd be better for us to wait till we were in a place where we could try things and see where it goes. So the first thing is, I wouldn't rely on language to do it. It would be more of a making a suggestion of something that's actionable. We try it, and then we have more data. And either we're moving in a good direction or we're moving away from it. We're moving towards it or away from it, and we never know. And so it's always an experiment. And maybe a simple way to talk about it would be like, if I gave you 2 dishes of food and asked you to taste them and tell me which one you like better. Usually it's pretty straightforward. You know, when you have 2 choices, which you like better. And I think most creativity can be boiled down to that. That's very different than, I wonder how this is going to perform on certain social media platforms. That's different than, what is it? When I'm tasting these 2 things, which is the one I want to finish eating? And if I were to say, I like this one better, but it needs a little salt, and then put a little salt on, it's like, maybe I put too much salt. And you know, when you taste it, it's like, it's that simple. Being in tune enough with ourselves to really know how we feel in the face of knowing that other people might feel very differently, which is part of the challenge. It's like, if everyone tells you A, and you listen and you're like, that's B. As an artist, it's important to be able to say, to me, it's B. And it's a disconnect, because so much of, when we go to school, it's to get us to follow the rules. And in art, it's different, because the rules are there as a scaffolding to be chipped away as need be. Sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not. And sometimes we'll even impose our own rules to give something its shape. So we can decide to make we're going to make a painting, but we're only going to use green and red, are the only colors we're allowed to use. We decide that in advance. And then how do we solve the problem knowing all we have is green and red? It can, because otherwise, if there's an infinite number of choices, anything can be anything. It's like, it's sometimes more choices is not better. So limiting your palette to something manageable forces you to solve problems in a different way. Now in our digital age, music-wise, you can make anything digitally. There's no, like there was a time when if you didn't have a guitar in the studio, you couldn't record guitar, or if you couldn't hire an orchestra, there couldn't be orchestra on your recording. Now you can just call any of those things up. So there's infinite choices, and infinite choices don't necessarily lead to better compositions or better final works. Understanding how you feel in the face of other voices without second guessing yourself is probably the single most important thing to practice as an artist, or skill set to develop as an artist, is to know how you feel and own your feelings. And the key to that is not, I know, so I know what's right for you. It doesn't work that way. It's just, I know for me. And the reason I chose to be an artist is to demonstrate, this is how I see it. If I'm undermining my taste for some commercial idea, or it defeats the whole purpose of doing this. That's not what this process is about. This process is, I'm doing me and I'm showing you who I am, and you can like it or not, but either way, this is still how I see it.
I love that, because in science, having trained graduate students, having been a graduate student, I was very blessed to have mentors one of who was a real iconoclast. He's dead now. Actually, all my advisors are dead. Suicide, cancer. The joke is you don't want me to work for you. So they were all had a morbid sense of humor. So they're laughing about this someplace right now.
I thought you were going to say they all ate the poison mushrooms.
No, but the last one said to me, "You're the common denominator, Andrew." And I thought, oh my goodness. And he said, kind of just kidding, but not really.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's a little bit eerie. But in any case, he always said, his name was Ben, he always said, the one thing I can't teach is taste. And the one predictor I have of the people who will never develop it are the ones who are perfectionists, because they're filtering their perfectionists that filter their perfection through the feedback of others. He was always looking for the person that was putting up a little bit of a middle finger to feedback, not so much that they would get things wrong, because you can be badly wrong in science. You can be wrong for the right reasons, but you can also be for the wrong reasons. Mm-hmm. But people that just had almost a compulsion to do it their way or to believe in what they were doing. And I'm hearing some of that, or I'm hearing that in what you're describing. I also think that there's something about the human empathic process or the emotional process where when we see somebody doing something and they seem to really not be paying attention to what anyone else is doing. Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess the crazy person on the street is one version of it where we go, they're just in their experience and it's just crazy. But when somebody seems to be enjoying themselves or the emotion seems to be real, I think there are a good fraction of people who feel a kind of gravitational pull and they go, yeah, that. And the best example I have of this is I remember growing up in the skateboard thing, we were the first to start doing the baggy, like sagging the clothes thing. And we got teased endlessly 1 year in school. Then there was a bunch of hip hop that came out and guys were sagging their jeans or their shorts. Next year we come back and the very same people who were making fun of us were all doing it. And that's when it clicked for me. I was like, most people don't actually know what they like.
No.
They like what they like because of the certainty of the people that they like. Mm-hmm. And so the question then is, in this landscape of creative stuff, what's real, what's not real? It's almost like whoever can create the most convincing story at least captures a good number of a good fraction of audiences. But that's not what the creative artist needs to do. They need to actually depart from that. Do I have that right?
Well, they're just two different things. Like coming up with a story with the purpose of pleasing someone else is a skill set, but it's more of a commercial endeavor than an artistic endeavor.
It's like tactical.
Yeah.
I was thinking in your book, you describe, again, when you're thinking about the creative process as the cloud. For me, again, it serves as such a powerful anchor. And then I think about the biology, the neurobiology of like strategy formation or strategy implementation. And then almost by sheer luck or miraculously, I turn a few pages later into the book and there's a description of how animals that are trying to accomplish something, eat, mate, find water, accomplish the requirements of living, it requires a narrow visual focus. This is something my lab is kind of obsessed with and I've been obsessed with. And in that more narrow visual focus, we know that the playbook becomes more narrow. The rule set is more narrow. Now, at some point, in order to come up with a new creative idea, that means broadening vision is essential in some way, or broadening thinking.
Well, it could either be a broadening or a narrowing, but it's changing the aperture from the standard. The reason we do this is to present something new that maybe you already knew but didn't know you knew it. And for that to be the case, you have to be looking at it. It's not unlike what a comedian does. A comedian makes you laugh. Usually what they're saying, it's outrageous, but you know that it's right. Just no one says it that way, or no one has said it that way before. But it's always the truth in it that makes it funny. It's like that. It's the same idea as recognizing something that seems really obvious once you see it, seems like nobody else sees it or no one else points it out. And I feel like science is like that too, because how much of science, when once the the light flashes over your head, it's like, I got it. It just seems like, well, we knew that forever. No one knew it, but do you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's so obvious.
Absolutely.
It's so obvious. And I think another superpower of artists is this accepting we don't know anything. When we think we know things, that also limits our world. We think we know it's only like this. This is all that's possible. We're mice in this little box. But in reality, who's to say that's the case? Who's to say we could take all of the what we believe in science now and decide to throw all of that away and start from scratch, and we'd probably create a whole different one.
I'd like to take a brief break and acknowledge our sponsor, Athletic Greens. Athletic Greens is an all-in-one vitamin mineral probiotic drink that also contains digestive enzymes and adaptogens. I started taking Athletic Greens way back in 2012, so that's 10 years now of taking Athletic Greens every single day. So I'm delighted that they're sponsoring this podcast. The reason I started taking Athletic Greens and the reason I still take Athletic Greens is that it covers all of my foundational nutritional needs. So whether or not I'm eating well or enough or not, I'm sure that I'm covering all of my needs for vitamins, minerals, probiotics, adaptogens to combat stress, and the digestive enzymes really help my digestion. I just feel much better when I'm drinking Athletic Greens. If you'd like to try Athletic Greens, you can go to athleticgreens.com/Huberman. And for the month of January, they have a special offer where they'll give you 10 free travel packs plus a year's supply of vitamin D3, K2. Vitamin D3 and K2 are vital for immune function, metabolic function, hormone health, but also calcium regulation and heart health. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Huberman to claim their special offer in the month of January of 10 free travel packs plus a year's supply of vitamin D3, K2. In an offline conversation, one time you asked a good friend of mine who's been a guest on this podcast, Eddie Chang, who's chair of neurosurgery, and I would place him in the top 1% of neuroscientists. He's pulling speech out of people who are completely paralyzed with locked-in syndrome, et cetera. And you asked him what percentage of what's contained in medical textbooks and training
today. Yeah. If you went to medical school today,
right,
and you learned what was in the textbook, what percentage of that information is accurate and what percentage is not? And he said, maybe half.
Right. And you asked, and what is the consequence of that? And he said, incalculable. And I completely agree. And I asked him a second time, and he still came up with the same answer. So that's a good sign. Reliability from experiment to the next is good. Yeah, I think that there is this idea that we really know things. In science, I mean, we've observed amazing discoveries from chance. We've observed amazing discoveries from incredible bouts of hard work. In both cases, people were spending a lot of time in the lab. Like, no one walked into the lab, saw something one day, and had a Nobel Prize winning discovery or fundamental discovery. They were all hanging out in lab a lot. Just some of them came up with something that they didn't expect. Others were drilling toward an answer.
And in all those cases, when the breakthroughs happen, I'm guessing, I don't know this, that considering we assume this information, then this discovery is true based on everything that came before it. But if everything that came before it is wrong, then the discoveries are probably built on do you know what I'm saying? It's like the context, everything that happens takes into account that the context that it's sitting in, it fits in that context. Maybe that context isn't right. Who knows? We don't know. So I'm saying we're too close to most things and thinking when we think we know things, where there are a lot of assumptions that go into it, and that any new discoveries are essentially built on top of these beliefs, but they're beliefs.
Well, I remember, of course, I listened to the Beastie Boys growing up. Who didn't? I was a child of the 90s, and they were in the, Sabotage was, sort of an outgrowth of a skateboarding movie like Spike Jonze and like the girl movies, and those worlds, the Beastie Boys and skateboarding were really closely interwoven for a while. Some people know this, some people don't. And Spike sort of formed the bridge, and then Spike went off and started making more bigger movies that more people watch. But let's just use them as an example. I heard you say once before that, you know, you guys were kind of joking around, like BC Boys, like, you know, these guys doing hip hop, but it was kind of like the hardcore scene in New York, and punk rock scene, and it was sort of a joke. There were a lot of inside jokes. When you were working together, was there the thought that people might love it, might hate it, or you just weren't paying attention at all?
Weren't paying attention at all. Never considered it. There were no, at that point in time when we were making Licensed to Ill, hip hop music was a tiny underground thing. And there was no one making hip hop at that time thought it would ever mean anything. It was not a realistic thought. So we were making it really for our crazy friends, and that's it.
So do you think nowadays the fact that one can create something and quote unquote release it quickly, I can put something out onto Twitter or Instagram now, I could do it in 10 seconds from now, and I will get immediate feedback which is external feedback, of course, but then I can iterate on the basis of that feedback. Do you think that's problematic for the larger opportunity for creativity? In other words, if we were to go back 20 years or even 15 years, when the opportunity to create was certainly still there, but you really didn't know how it was going to land until you quote unquote released it.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me there was more opportunity to stay in that magical rainforest that is the creativity itself.
I don't think it's wrong or right. It's more information that you can use or not use, and use it in a useful way. And, you know, you can make something and put it out and people could not like it. And you're like, oh, they still don't get it. Here, I got to go harder. You know, like I got to go harder in that direction. Not, do you know what I'm saying? It's like not to react away from information. It can be helpful. It can be helpful when there could be different stories that happen at the same time where you're making something and you have an idea of what it is, and then other people engage with it and they have a different idea of what it is, and they like it for a different reason than you did, or dislike it for a reason different than the reason you like it. We can't control any of those things, you know? The only part of it that we can control is how we relate to the thing that we make. And any external information that undermines the clarity of that connection is probably bad for the art, is my guess. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm only saying this from my experience. Like I try to make things, all I've ever tried to make was something I like, or something that I felt like was missing as a fan that I wanted, and nobody was making it, so I'll make it, you know. But it wasn't. It was always in the service of, I love this thing. I want something like this. No one else is making one. I have to make one.
Yeah, it's beautiful, because the word that keeps coming to mind is this. It's almost like a compulsion. Like there are other options of ways to be and to behave and to function and work in life, but if something's a compulsion, it yanks us away from those other opportunities just enough that we have to get back to it. You've talked before about, and you talk in the book, this notion of the source. And to me, again, I can't help but put my neuroscientist lens on this. I think of the source as not one brain area, but some function within the brain where we are in touch with our bodily signals, like what feels right, what doesn't, sort of like tasting the two foods. I love that example. And that it's a playbook that is far more vast than the short-term adaptive playbook. Like, this is how I'm going to get from point A to point B. And yet, when I listen to an album or a song, I mean, I have to assume that at some point it becomes not strategy development or creativity, but strategy implementation. Like, there needs to be, like, the songs are going to come in this order. And like, I don't know much about music. My musician friends are always, you know,
I don't
laughing.
either.
It's
not so much about music.
Right. Well put. But the ordering of the sequence of the melodies, et cetera. So at what point does one decide, okay, like now's the time to get into that more narrow focus of effort? Like, we've got it. Let's run with this. Because there is a component of the creative process that involves packaging and finishing. And is that part less satisfying to you, or is it just all part of the same larger arc?
It's all part of the same. It's nice. There's a good feeling. There's usually a good feeling when something is done. On the one hand, it's a commitment, because up until the time that you say it's done, you can keep experimenting and changing it. You know, if you think, well, maybe tomorrow I can make it better, then it's not finished. And you keep thinking that for a long time, you can do that forever and never put out anything. So getting to the point where you're ready to sign off is a good feeling. And it allows you, one of the things I talk about in the book is, because it is a difficult thing to do, because it's fun to play and it's fun to, maybe it's not the best it could be yet, you know, to use whatever the next project is going to be as motivation to finish the one you're working on now. Like, I'm working on this, I'm spending all of my time on this thing. It's really good. I believe it can be better, but there's this other thing that I really want to make. And if I keep tinkering with this one, I'll never get to make the other one. So using other projects as a impetus to finish something and release it into the world is a good one. And you said your description of source as something within us. I don't know if I would say that was accurate. It's definitely in us too, but it's not only in us. And it's, I think of source as the organizing principle of everything. And it's how everything exists, how the trees grow and why there are mountains, and anything that we can see in the outside world, and every discovery and every piece of art and every new design and every machine are all outgrowths of this source energy. Our part of it is the antenna that like connects to it. Mm-hmm. And maybe we're the vehicle for source to allow things to happen in the world.
And thank you for that, because I did indeed misspeak, because I recall very distinctly in the book you described how, you know, the physical world is constrained by the laws of physics, and certain things the imagination is unconstrained. And I think I have this right, that you said that, you know, the work sits somewhere between those. It's neither of one nor the other, but that ultimately what feeds into all of that, our imagination and the way indeed that our brain is a physical entity, the nature in the outside world provides at least what appears to be near infinite, if not infinite, options. And I love the example of the color palette, that if we restrict me to whatever sorts of paints or medium I have, then it's restricted. But in nature, there's an infinite number of shades and tones and combinations.
And even on one, you know, if you pick up a rock and look at the color of the rock and tried to find a paint to match that rock, it would never match. There's too much, there are too many variations in nature within a single color rock for us to get close. There's too much information. We scratch the surface. We're only scratching the surface.
I picked the software engineering program because they pay very well. It's a fast-paced industry. The boot camp allowed me to keep my job, honestly, and continue working. My end goal was to be able to live in a cool city and have enough money to do fun things and enjoy my life, and I just didn't see any of that in the career I was in. I happened to see a job posting that was in Atlanta, and so I said, I'll just go ahead and apply to this. I jokingly put in like a 6-figure number as what I want for my salary, and they came back with the offer with the exact same number. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of money. It really doesn't matter your current career, what you did in the past, how old you are or what you're doing now. If you want to change your career and get into tech, it's totally possible.
And we love when we are able to peer in at different scales, spatial scales, time scales too, but spatial scales. The delight that comes from that, like these nature pictures. It seemed like there were more of these in the 80s, like where you'd see a drop of oil shot at very high resolution. Mm-hmm. There's beauty in a drop of oil. And then you'd see the Earth and the galaxy. There's beauty in that too, right? These extremes. And of course, our daily perception is mostly through the filter of these kinds of interactions, walls, and sometimes outdoors. There's a brilliant neuroscientist, and not surprisingly, he has a Nobel. His name is Richard Axel. He's at Columbia University. He's an outrageous personality. Chews Nicorette nonstop. You guys would get along great, not because of the Nicorette, but because his perspective on things is very abstract for a guy who's solved. He won the Nobel for solving a great problem within how we smell. Perception of odors and taste. And he says, that everything that the brain does is an abstraction. Like I could take a photograph of your face and show it to you and say, yeah, that's me. Or let's say for the moment, I call myself an abstract artist. Let's just play a game because I've never been accused of being an artist. And I do 3 dots and a squiggly line and I say, that's you. And you say, well, that doesn't look like me. And I say, but that's my abstraction of you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, the brain essentially does that. Because or something in between that, because there's no actual photograph of you in my brain. It's just a bunch of neurons playing what we call an ensemble, like a different keys on a piano. And we go, Rick, I recognize you, Rick Rubin. And so everything is an abstraction. And it's only once we start tinkering with the parts, and this is the essence of science, to remove and add and manipulate. And the best example I can come up with would be Rothko. And I only come up with this example because I started off in vision science, and maybe this will make the most sense to everyone except the folks who've been blind since birth, and they can swap something in here. If I show you a Rothko and I don't tell you it's a Rothko, you may or may not actually think it's that impressive. It depends on your taste in art. But what Rothko did, which was amazing, even if you don't like Rothkos, and I happen to, is that he removed all the white and high contrasty stuff. And when you do that, you alter color space. And so the colors look very different. Some people saw that dress a few years ago. Is it orange or is it gold or whatever? That was a little bit of the same phenomenon. I doubt, in fact, I'd be willing to bet my left arm that Rothko knew nothing about the neuroscience of color perception, but somehow got to this place where if there was no canvas showing and no high contrast, and the paintings were large enough and on the appropriate wall, you saw them a certain way that tapped into something fundamental. And this is where I think art and science really converge, is that every once in a while we see something that feels amazing to enough people, and not just like the baggy pants phenomenon, not just because other people think it's cool, but there's something there. And again, this defies language. And I have to imagine that in your years of life, and music and other creative endeavors, that every once in a while, have you ever encountered something where like something fundamental keeps showing up in different form, or there's something like almost like a rule or a principle? Does it ever come about? Because in science, we think of this as like, reveals something about our limitation to abstract the world. I hope I made that clear.
Not exactly, but I have a thought. You talked earlier about the drop of oil, the photograph of the drop of oil, and the photograph, or we could use on the other side, like Hubble telescope images of these vast things in high definition. What we see every day is as impressive as those things, but we're numb to them because we see them all the time. And if we were to look at drops of oil every day in a microscope, a month from now, we would not find wonder in that image. So sometimes it's the novelty of not seeing it from that perspective before that's really thrilling. I could imagine, and this probably relates to the Rothko idea, that you could see something from a particular angle and have this magical experience, and then walk 3 feet to the side and see it from a different way, and it just evaporates. It only works. It only triggers this thing in us when we look at it just the right way. There was an experiment I just heard about the other day that sounds fascinating, that a painting teacher recommended, where instead of painting, having a model in the room and painting the model, that you have the model in the next room, and you go into the next room without your equipment. You don't have your equipment, and you can study the model for as long as you want. And then you go into a different room where you can't see the model and paint the model instead of, and it changes your relationship where we're not just painting the lines. We're painting what is interesting enough about what I saw. What are the data points that stuck in my mind? And when I string those together, what do I get? And how do I form it to get as close to whatever that the experience of that person was, which the closest of getting to the experience of that person in the painting might not look like a photograph. It might look more different than more the same to really see what you see. This, if we think about the Picasso paintings that were inspired by African art, where the eyes are on different levels, they may give us more information than a photograph would give us. I'm thinking about when you were describing the sensation of when something takes your breath away, and we all have that when we see a dramatic sunset. Anyone when there's a really dramatic sunset, or if there's a whale, and if anyone's on the beach and there's a whale, everybody's really interested that there's a whale. Do you know what I'm saying? These feelings of wonder, we get to experience them depending on where we are, or a dragonfly, or a bird flies into your space. These things happen, and when they happen, it's like we're confronted with the mystery of the world when we change the perspective. Normally, we don't think of whales in our backyard or birds in our house, flying freely, but they do happen. These things do happen, and they like break us out of our trance when these things happen. It's like, oh yeah, there are birds like this everywhere. I'm just not paying attention. This guy's coming in to like tap me on the shoulder. It's like, remember me? Here I am,
So I would say that the whale example and what you're describing is it's revealing to us how, in a delightful way, how deficient our perceptual filters normally are.
Yes.
It's a little bit like the Rothko is revealing how, I've never thought about it this way until this moment, is revealing to us how color normally looks is actually, first of all, not the only way it looks. Those colors we think are one way, but all of color, this gets into the biology of color vision, is all about contrast. What something is next to dictates what it looks like. Mm-hmm. And that's the origin of that dress meme or whatever you call it. I still can't figure out exactly what a meme is. Someone will eventually tell me. In the same way, when you see a whale and it's delightful, I think it's revealing to us the extent to which those whales the ocean is vast. There's a whole universe there, and we are blind to it all the time. And I think the misperception or the misconception, is that we're delighted because we see the whale. We might be just as delighted because we're getting hit with the contrast of how little we recognize all the time. And in that way, it reminds me a little bit about comedy, and I've been watching more comedy lately, and sometimes it's the shock, sometimes it's the absolute truth that's revealed, and then other times, what I've noticed, and I saw Rogan do comedy at the Vulcan Club in Austin, which he does every once in a while, and it was a small club, and he was leading out this story during his routine or bit, I think, right? This bit, he's leading, and everyone knew where it was going. We all knew. And then when he finally told us, it was exactly where we thought it was going, and it was hilarious.
And it felt good.
And it felt amazing. And I thought in that moment, I was like, wait a second, how did he pull that off? That was masterful, because normally it's this thing like you create one story, there's like a scripting out, almost like a courtroom lawyer, and then they kind of pull the curtain and it's something different. It's the and if you look at the science, the neuroscience and brain imaging of laughter and humor, which I've looked into, to be honest, and no disrespect to the people in that field, it's pretty lame. It's lame because it's always the jarring nature of a surprise. But what he led us to was something that, oh no, he's actually going there. Oh wait, he's really going there. And it was this anticipation with a beautiful delivery at the end. Mm-hmm. And so I'm convinced that, based on what we're talking about here, that there's something about when we see something, we think it's about that, but that the delight that we feel could be about all the other experiences that now become, in a subconscious way, kind of like, it's almost like laughing at this perceptual deficit that we have. It's almost like laughing at how little we actually know, which is what you've said.
Yeah, it could be that. It also could be the sense of community of when you think it's going to go a particular way and it goes that way. It's like reinforcement of you. You know, it's like, yeah, he's saying it, but in a way we're saying it together. I'm listening, he's saying it, but we're in this together. And that's a good feeling.
To think about that for a second. I was trying to think about why certain music still can evoke such powerful emotions in me. And there does seem to be something special about the music we listen to when we are teenagers, you know, from about, 14 until about 25, it seems to get routed into our nervous system in some way. Maybe because that phase of our life is really one of identity crisis. I mean, you don't find too many 40-year-olds, some, who are wondering like who they are. Yeah. Occasionally, but almost every young teenager or preteen, and it's kind of like, who am I? You're defining personality. So I always likened it to that. But leaving out the sort of critical period biology stuff, what do you think it is about the music that we hear at that time? Are we that much more emotionally tuned? Have we not shut down our sensors quite as much? Because the songs and the artists don't matter because they're very individual to me. For other people, it'll be the Beatles or something. Now I just really wish the Beatles did it for me too. But do you think that's important? Because I could see how it's really terrific. I could also see how it sets up one of these, what I'll just use nerdy language to call like a semi-deprived filter. Because if I'm only looking for the way that like a Stiff Little Fingers track made me feel the first time I listened to it when I was 15, the feeling is worthwhile. But if I'm looking for that, I'm missing all the other stuff. I'm missing the Beatles. I'm missing Fleetwood Mac, which never did it for me either. I'm missing all this stuff that, people I love and respect really love. Mm-hmm. So I've never worried about it because there's kind of an infinite treasure trove of other things that I do love. But I do sometimes wonder whether or not my life experience is diminished because I'm not allowing kind of range. And you've obviously worked in a huge number of different genres of music. Punk is one thing, hip hop isn't. I mean, Neil Diamond too, right? Eminem too, right? Slayer too, right? And in some senses, I list these off. I mean, just think about how much in high school, maybe nowadays less so, but even in college and as an adult, we're sort of asked to constrain ourselves to one of these groups. I didn't know it was okay to love Bob Dylan and love punk rock as much as I do until I heard Tim Armstrong said he loved Bob Dylan. Yeah. And I was like, and recently he told me he loves the Grateful Dead. And I was like, whoa. Yeah. But I remember when you had to pick.
Both the Ramones and the Clash loved the Beatles. So we can.
Okay, I've got work to do.
No, but we'll do it together. It'll be fun. So I have a feeling part of it is the reason it gets in at that age is it's at a time when we're defining who we are, and the music is part of the definition of how we see ourselves. So it's the music that we hear before that might be the music that's on the radio or our parents' music or our older brother or sister's music. And then when you're 14 or 15 and you start choosing what you're listening to, it's like, now it's finally mine. And my parents might not like it, and my older brothers and sisters may or may not like it, but this one is mine. And it always has that impression in us that this is ours. That's my thought of why it continues to last.
How do you wipe the slate clean then? Like, so for instance, if you're going to go in and work with somebody new, and again, as people are hearing this, I hope that they're transplanting this to whatever it is that they do. Because in the realm of science and podcasting and communication, it's not music, but there's a contour and a way, hopefully this podcast will look nothing like it does in 5 years. That's my hope, is it will still have the core features of the beauty and utility of biology coming through, but I hope it doesn't look anything like episode 2.
Yeah,
right?
And I think it'll evolve as you evolve. It's just the truer it is to what interests you. And if you're not interested in biology in the same way in 5 years, I would hope it's not the same.
I'll be doing psychoanalysis in real time here. We'll do therapy. We'll all be lying down on couches.
Whatever it is,
yeah,
whatever it is.
Yeah. We probably won't be on psychedelics, but we might be levitating, I'd like to take a brief break and thank our sponsor, Inside Tracker. Inside Tracker is a personalized nutrition platform that analyzes data from your blood and DNA to help you better understand your body and help you reach your health goals. I've long been a believer in getting regular blood work done for the simple reason that many of the factors that impact your immediate and long-term health can only be analyzed from a quality blood test. The problem with a lot of blood and DNA tests out there, however, is that you get data back about metabolic factors, lipids, and hormones and so forth, but you don't know what to do with those data. Inside Tracker solves that problem and makes it very easy for you to understand what sorts of nutritional, behavioral, maybe even supplementation-based interventions you might want to take on in order to adjust the numbers of those metabolic factors, hormones, lipids, and other things that impact your immediate and long-term health to bring those numbers into the ranges that are appropriate and indeed optimal for you. If you'd like to try Inside Tracker, you can visit insidetracker.com/Huberman and get 20% off any of Inside Tracker's plans. That's insidetracker.com/Huberman to get 20% off. So how do you, let's talk a little bit, if you would, because I know I'm very interested in your process. Right? I'll spare you the daily routine question. It's very cliche, but you and I are both lovers of sunlight, of horizons, and not as a trivial source, as an amazing gift of energy, right? And there aren't words for it, really. Aside from your daily routines, when it comes to, somebody, you're going from project to project and you're going to be doing work with somebody, could be your own work, and we'll talk about the writing of this book and its structure, which is very unique. I've never encountered a book with this kind of structure before. And it's the most facile read ever, and yet every single page I underlined, took notes, starred, and as you'd notice, it's very worn, very, very worn already, and only more so over time. Do you have a process for removing the functions of the day and what you were doing last week and what's going on, and in order to get more access to this? I'm going to think of it now more as a receiver inside of you, right? Almost like tuning a radio, and then it comes in, like the beginning of like a strummer clash thing, right? You love the radio, Joe loved the radio, right? And then it comes in clear, and there it is. How do you clear the static? What are some of the operational steps that you think might be more generalizable to, regardless of where somebody in Africa's listening to this now?
I would say when I engage in a particular project, whatever it is, I dedicate all of myself for that period of time, whatever it is, whether it be 20 minutes or whether it be 5 hours, whatever it is. Total focus and no outside distraction whatsoever. And when I leave that process, I do my best not to think about it when I'm away from it. I don't bring any materials with me. I don't leave the studio with works in progress and spend time listening to them during the day or looking for ideas. I stay as far away from it when I'm not directly engaging in it as possible. And in the best of situations, I have something else to totally engage myself in between. So instead of working on project A for 5 hours and then leaving and doing nothing, I'm hoping to engage in a project B or B, C, and D with all of myself before going back to project A again, which might be the next day, let's say.
So this relates to an amazing chapter and series of writings in your book that I'm not going to describe because I want people to find it for themselves about disengaging from the process. One question I had as I read that chapter, and as you're saying this now, is even though you're disengaged, do you believe that your subconscious is working it through?
I believe so. And I think in general, to stew over a problem is not the way to solve a problem. I think to hold the problems lightly. And when I say a problem, when we're starting a project, there's usually this feeling of there's a question mark at the beginning of every project. I'm always anxious when I start a new project because I have no idea what's going to happen. I never know. I may have, in some cases, a potential backup plan if nothing works. But I really try not even to have that. I prefer not to have that. I prefer to go in, maybe to calm myself down enough to be able to show up. There'll be an idea of like, okay, if nothing works, maybe we could try something like this. But that would only be for my own anxiety. It wouldn't be for actual practical use. But there's always a sense of anxiety because I know whatever's going to happen is completely out of my control. Something either interesting or not will appear, and then we're going to follow that wherever it goes. And until something appears for us to follow, I have a lot of anxiety. Even though it has never not come, it has come every time, but there's something about it because I also feel like there might be expectation on me that I'm going to make it happen. And I know that's not happening. That's not how it works. I show up ready for it to happen and am open to whatever we have to do to find that first thread. And once we find the thread, then it's like, okay, we have that thread may lead us to anything, could lead us to in a million different directions. But something about having that glimmer that it's not we're not looking at a blank page. We're looking at, okay, we have the beginnings of, I would say a map, but it's a map that we don't know where it takes us. And it's just the beginning. It's just a start, you are here. If you have a map and it says you are here, even if you can't see the directions, knowing where we are feels okay. And once we get, and usually in the first couple of days, it happens. But up until then, it's really an anxiety producing situation. And then I can't remember the original question. So that was the beginning of something completely different. But do you remember what you asked? I don't remember.
Yeah, well, we were talking about disengaging and as your subconscious into it, and then we were talking about, sort of, I love this. So, like, what is your process of wading into this thing? And you're revealing that now. I mean, I think of anxiety as readiness. Think about the characteristic features of anxiety. It tends to be a bit of a constriction of the visual field into more of a narrow vision. But that's appropriate because you want to shed what's going on elsewhere. And then, even when people talk about the shakes or this, like not feeling okay sitting still, anxiety was designed to mobilize us and not always to run away. This is one of the, rarely do I talk about the work in my own laboratory, but one of the things that frankly I didn't discover, but it was done in my laboratory, but this brilliant graduate student, Lindsay Soleil, who's now at Caltech, was that can often observe animals or humans in very high states of anxiety as they move forward toward a goal. And we always think of moving forward as like this calm thing, these heroes, Rosa Parks telling people like, F you, like, I'm not getting off the back, I'm not leaving giving up my seat on the bus, or Muhammad Ali. I bet you they were experiencing tremendous anxiety, but it was in the forward tilt. And so I think anxiety is least comfortable when we are forcing ourselves to stand still. So it's an activating energy. And, that brings up a word that, I have written in my notebook as an extraction of a lot of themes from within the book that you and I have talked about before, which is, and here I'm going to sound very West Coast woo, but I mean it as seriously as it can be stated, that I feel like everything is energetic, right? We can do things from a place of anger. We can do things from a place of joy. We can do things from a place of delight. I like to think maturing into the idea that joy and delight and love is kind of the ultimate reservoir of energy. But, a lot of the music that I liked from when I was younger was because of the anger that was thread into it, or the sadness.
But if you think of your relationship to that music, it's a relationship of love. You
Absolutely.
didn't listen to that to get angry.
No.
You listened to it because you loved it.
Yeah. And I felt loved by it because
Yes.
it matched where I was at the time.
Yes, it was true to who you were and where you were.
I know that collaboration, there's a wonderful chapter on collaboration, but it's collaboration, as you mentioned before, with the universe, not with others. But in terms of especially the kind of work that you've done and do, when it comes to working with artists, I do wonder, and here I'm not looking for any gossip or stories. I've never been interested in gossip. I love stories, but I'm not interested in gossip. But once you see that thread kind of dangling there, and you're gonna go after this, or you grab onto it, and you're like, okay, now you have a little bit of a map and an orientation within that map. I often wonder, scientists are complicated people. People think they're very boring, but they're actually very complicated because they're often living in one limited rule set of the prefrontal cortex. That's how you get good at getting degrees, is by understanding the rules of academia and playing by those rules.
Yes.
People tinker with the rules. You get your Richard Axels, who are very playful in how they go about it, but they are systematic. He's known for rigor, right? When I think of creative artists and musical artists, I think of a bit more zany or loose, or you watch the documentary about the Ramones and you're like, wow, there's all this chaos. Because so many of the brilliant artists, musical artists that are out there seem to have some chaos inside them, or their lives aren't always structured. Oftentimes, and science too, by the way, there are substance abuse issues and personal life issues. Since you don't have 100% control, they need to play the instruments, sing, etc. How do you work with people who have it in them but are getting in their own way, right? And do you think that kind of the internal chaos that a lot of artists seem to have, do you think that sometimes is actually an essential piece of the creativity picture, that you can't disentangle it?
Yeah, I don't think it's an essential piece in general, but certain artists, that's how they do it. I would say I rarely get to see the chaotic part of artists. For whatever reason, they rarely show it to me. And most of them, like most comedians I know, are much more serious about what they're doing than what it looks like from if you see them on stage. There's much more to it, and there's much more focus on craft going on and digging deep than would necessarily be obvious seeing them jump around on stage.
Yeah, I'm a fan of boxing, track and field and boxing, the sports nobody really cares about now that UFC is so popular. And and track and field it's a little bit like wrestling. When you go, the people that are there because they really love it. We'll talk about wrestling in a little bit, professional wrestling. But Floyd Mayweather is obviously a colorful character and one of the best records in boxing of all time. And a few years back, I got into watching his stuff, and what one sees is the cars and the money. They literally call themselves the money team, and the spending and there's all the outrageous stuff. But I know someone who was in camp with him, who actually was a sparring partner for him, and the lore has it, they have very closed door sparring or camps, but the lore is that he would do, because nowadays it's 12 3-minute rounds, right, with a minute in between. Used to be 15, but now neuroscientists stepped in, and it turns out a lot of the deaths were occurring when it was more than 12 rounds.
Wow.
For whatever reason, it cut
That's
off at 12, really seemed to truncate the death. There are other things too. If the dad is apparently a cornerman, we have someone else here at the podcast who knows more about this than me.
That's
but
fascinating.
yeah, the kid not wanting to disappoint the parent correlated with death. And I'll get some of this wrong, and they can come after me. But in any case, this guy who was in Floyd's camp said that he would do 30 to 60 minutes of sparring, bringing in fresh sparring partners with no rest. That he would run 3 or 4 times per 24-hour cycle, despite all the critical need for sleep. That his training was unbelievably intense, to the point where he would just chew up and destroy all training partners. And yet the perception that we see is it's playful for him. So it sounds very similar. Like what we see is often not what goes into it, that people are intensely rigorous.
Yeah. And I think in a way, from a psychological perspective, if you knew you were fighting someone who wasn't taking it seriously, that would give you some confidence, and that would not be a good thing if the person was actually working really hard, outworking you. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Like, it's from a psychological perspective, that makes sense to me.
So what I keep coming back to is that I'm imagining in my mind kind of 2 ends of the continuum. One that is about fairly narrow focus, training, strategy implementation, cultivating craft, building craft. And then the other side is the cloud. Yeah. It's very nebulous, right? And there's this word that I learned from a colleague of mine when I was down at the Salk Institute, when my lab was there, because he studies this. There's this phenomenon that I don't want to mispronounce, because then it sounds like something else. But the correct pronunciation is pareidolia. And pareidolia is our tendency to look at an amorphous shape like a cloud or a tree and think that it looks like something else. An ice cream cone.
Yeah.
The man in the moon.
Yep.
And that, again, reveals the extent to which the brain wants to place symbolic filters on things. And we need this, right? Because I see you walk in the door and, Rick, I recognize you. In fact, we have a brain area called the fusiform face gyrus that literally is a face recognition area. And you could be at any orientation, or I could just see your eyes and know that it's you. There's a phenomenon called prosopagnosia, where people can see faces, they can describe everything in the face, but they don't know, for instance, that it's JFK or Madonna or Lex Friedman.
It's quite the list.
Quite the list. There you go, Lex. Run for office, Lex. Just kidding. It's hard enough to get you to respond to my text as it is. So we have these filters, and so we're taking this cloud and we're deciding what things are.
Yes.
And what I want to drill into your process a little bit more deeply, when you approach a project, so everyone meets each other, shakes hands, here are the engineers, we're going to sit down, everyone knows what they're doing, because you work with professionals, and you start going, are you trying to be with the cloud or in the implementation? Like, where are you in that continuum? And forgive me if I'm like trying to surgically go into your process in a way that would disrupt it in any way. But I trust you've been doing this for a while, and there's no threat.
I'm in the cloud, with the exception of I'm aware of what could go wrong on a technical side, and I might, like, if something good is happening, I might look over and make sure that we're rolling.
So that's a leap over to here momentarily, but then you're back in the cloud.
Maybe if I feel like, if I was in the moment, I would be in the cloud, and if something good starts happening, it would trigger something in me like, oh, I hope we're really doing this, because I don't know if we could ever do this again. That would be a thought of when the first time the real world would come into the picture would be, something good is happening, let's not lose it.
And when that happens, never been in a studio besides a podcast studio, Do you say, hey guys, that sounded good, more of that? Or do you wait, you let them continue? Because obviously you don't want to break their flow.
Would never want to break any flow once it's happening. Yeah, once something's happening, just kind of sit back and watch.
And do you think there's resonance, like the team of engineers and other people know when it, quote unquote, is happening?
If everyone's paying attention, yes. When everyone's paying attention, it's usually pretty obvious. Sometimes the threat will be something different than expected, and maybe not everybody would pick up on it. And that might be particular based on my taste or an artist's taste, or someone involved might say, let's listen back to that. I think that was better than we thought. That can happen.
If y'all don't got arcade, y'all better get arcade. Arcade has the best samples in the game. It's about to be 2024. Why don't you guys got arcade?
Virtual instruments, samplers, it's pretty much everything in one.
Before I had Output Arcade, I wasted a lot of time looking for the right sound, and now that's just gone.
The ever-growing pool of well-produced sounds and custom kits, you have something truly unique and special in today's market.
It has such a wide variety of diverse sounds.
Tons and tons of libraries of samples, all totally customizable. And you know, if you're sampling, that is a must.
You can try it for free for 30 days. I cannot recommend this plugin more. It is a game changer.
You said several things, and it was like you said enough for there to be several conversations.
I tend to do that. Sorry, especially with you. I don't get to see you nearly as often as I would like, and so when I do, I confess that I'm a little bit of a kid in a candy shop.
I wrote down the brain tells us stories. So you talked about I walk in, certain data points, you recognize me, but it's a real like looking at a cloud shorthand. We go through our lives doing this all day with everything we see. And the shorthand, in the case of me, you know me, the shorthand turns out to be right. It checks out. If it's something we don't know and something we're not familiar with, something happens. We experience something on the street, something happens, and it doesn't make sense. Something out of the ordinary happens. First thing is this doesn't make sense. Then what we do is, again, subconscious, unconsciously, I don't know if it's unconscious or subconsciously, without thinking, we create a story that explains what just happened, a hypothetical that makes it okay that what just happened, and oh, maybe he's running because his dog ran away and he's chasing his dog. Maybe that's why he's running. And as soon as we have that thought of what it might be, we relax, because now it's not just a guy running and this is weird, but it's a guy running, oh, he's probably running after his dog. And now we register that story that we just made up without even knowing we were making it up as what happened. And then later in the day, if someone says, yeah, do you see that guy running out of the box? Like, yeah, he was chasing his dog. I saw that. And you won't even realize that it was the maybe hypothetical story that was the first possible explanation that allowed you to continue walking. Do you know what I'm saying? That's our whole lives. Our whole lives are reacting to things, making up a story of what we think may have happened without realizing that's what we're doing, and then living the rest of our lives as if that thing that we made up really happened. And we never know.
I completely agree. We confabulate from birth until death. There's this well-observed phenomenon in people who have memory deficits. There's the sad example of this, and then there's the everyday typical, who knows, sad or not sad example. So for instance, if somebody has a slight memory deficit or someone has Alzheimer's dementia, they'll find themselves in the hallway at night and say, what are you doing here? And they'll say, oh, I was going to get a glass of water, but they're walking away from the direction that would make sense.
Yeah.
People who, alcoholics who drink enough develop something called Korsakoff syndrome, where a certain brain area gets messed up, and you'll ask them a question like, oh, what are you doing here? And they will come up with incredible stories, sometimes interesting stories that have no bearing on reality.
Yeah.
You ask them who their name is.
But do they believe that's what happened?
With 100% certainty. And this actually relates to a lot of the now better understood controversy around repressed memories.
Mhm.
You know, you can, especially from young people, you can pull memories from them of things that never happened. This has been demonstrated over and over again. So courtrooms know to be very cautious now about this whole notion of repressed memories.
That's good to know.
Yeah, very, very complicated area of the law, as you can imagine, because we tend to want to trust victims for understandable reasons. But in terms of accuracy of details, two people have very different accounts of the same experiences, and this has been shown over and over again. And
Yes.
even that you can do well in the laboratory. It's pretty interesting. So again, because of this selective filtering and storytelling, and I think it was Salman Rushdie who said, we are the storytelling species. He probably...
Wow, I was going to say we're storytelling machines, but that's great.
Yeah, I think, we are the story. I would say that the big five, if I had to pick up sort of brain function, is we are very limited filters. The mantis shrimp sees 67 shades of red for every one that we see.
Yeah.
So they have access to things we don't have access to.
Yes.
They're not, as far as I know, releasing albums of the, Red Hot Chili Peppers caliber, but who knows? Maybe down there they are. I did see something, by the way, as a relevant tangent recently, and I don't know if it's, look, even if it's crazy, it's super cool. If you take a device that amplifies the electrical signals coming from cactus, and you just translate that into a simple rule of conversion to 2 or 3 pitches of sound, the music that comes out of it is beautiful.
Wow, that's
nothing short of beautiful.
Great.
And when I saw that, the teenager in me thought, when we hear whale song, we think it's so beautiful. Like, what if they're just like cursing at each other the whole time? Or, right? I mean, maybe they're in there like a Rogan episode when he invites all his comedian friends in there. Yeah. Who knows? Maybe it's a psychoanalytic conversation about their childhood traumas. I don't know.
Yes.
But we decide whale song is beautiful.
Yes.
We decide cactus are just plants.
And it's beautiful to us. And we're right that it is beautiful to us, but it doesn't mean we know anything about it.
That's right. Yeah, so we have these filters, perceptual filters. We only can see and hear, smell and taste what we can. And then the brain likes to work in symbols. We tend to like to match that person whose shoes are messed up must be homeless. I've had a couple instances in life where I saw what I thought was a homeless vagrant inside a building at an academics institution. It turned out it was the most accomplished person in the field. That's always cool. Yes, that happened at Berkeley. Then the other thing that we do is we tend to put, so we said perception, symbol representations, and then our memories are entirely confabulated based on already deficient symbol and perceptual representation.
Yes.
And so I never like the statement that we don't know how the brain works.
Yeah.
I think we do know how the brain works, but that it works through very limited filters.
Yes.
Okay, so knowing that and accepting it, and it seems to me that this idea of looking to nature, looking outside us, is so critical. And in fact, I hope you won't mind me sharing this, but a few years back, I had sent you something by text, and I was kind of in disbelief about something I'd seen in the media. I was like, they got it all wrong, and I knew the person involved, and it was not a good situation for them, and I was like, they got it all wrong. And you wrote back, you said, it's all lies. Back to nature, the only truth.
Wow.
And
that's wild.
And I wrote that down. I put it over my desk.
Wow.
And I still, I'd tattooed it on my forehead if I didn't already have it well committed to memory. But I know that's true, right? Nature we can look at, and it's...
But when I say it's all lies, you just talked about our ability to, how limited our facility to see and understand what we see. Yes?
Yes.
So based on that leads us to, we can't know much. Do you know what I'm saying? Our resolution is so low on everything that we're really just like, we're grasping at straws. We have no idea. We have no idea. And there's great power in knowing that. Because if you think you know what's going on, chances are you're being deceived. Not because somebody's deceiving you, but because they're telling you what they see and they don't know. It's all, do you know what I'm saying? It's all made up. Everything we know is made up. Maybe it's true. This brings us to pro wrestling. It's the reason that pro wrestling is closer to reality than anything else we can watch or any other content. We know it's made up. We know that it's a performance. It's storytelling. And that's how everything is, except we think wrestling's fake and the world is real. Wrestling's real and the world's fake.
You talk about in the book, we're definitely going in this direction. In the book, you talk about this notion of entertaining the idea of the opposite being true. Yeah. And there are not only emerging, but established fields of psychology that are making great ground, I think, into the human psyche. Byron Katie's work and others, where you take a statement and you start playing with that statement you poke at its authenticity. Yeah. And when I first heard that, I thought, this is kind of hokey, right? It's just words. And then I realized how foolish I was being, because she's really onto something. And there are others too, of course, but in science, that's exactly what you do. You don't really ask questions in science. You are forced to raise hypotheses and try and say true or false. Now, there are limitations to that approach, certainly. I mean, pure observational studies have been incredible in terms of what they've revealed to us, especially in medicine. You know, a patient that has a bullet hole through a certain area of the brain, you don't go in and say, oh, I hypothesize that person will have a deficit in seeing faces. No, the person wandered into the clinic and they go, this person cannot sees faces but can't make sense of them. And then you forensically arrive at an understanding. So, but in general, we go about things in this way, and considering that the opposite might be true, well, that's a little bit, I suppose, of like seeing the whale at the surface of the water. It's like, well, the opposite of my experience, which is all above water for the most part, is maybe not the complete experience of life. Yeah. You start seeing the inverse all the time. So I want to
consider the inverse all the time. And it really relates to the way that you described how we see colors is based on contrast. So maybe blue's only blue in relation to yellow. So if blue is our choice, if we're not considering yellow, blue doesn't exist. Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It's like we talk about night. It's only night because there's day. If there was no day, there is no night. In all of our cases, like it's like the yin yang. You know, it's like there's the light and the shadow. Always, there's always another side for everything, and we focus on one aspect. But if we look at the other aspect, chances are we'll learn something too.
The nervous system is not just able to do this, it's the way it does everything. 2 experiments I'll just briefly describe. My scientific great-grandparents, David Hubel and Torrance Weasel, showed that if you force a person to look at something for a long period of time without moving their eyes, there's a way that you can do this, the image disappears, because normally your eyes are making little microsaccades and you're comparing what you're seeing to what's right next to it. Wow. Pixel by pixel, pixel by pixel, pixel. Wow. If we don't even have to use the example of pressing on the arm, we're sitting in chairs right now, and until I said, you know, what's going on at the level of sensation on the backs of your thighs, you were unaware of it, because if you experience a pressure or a smell in a room, you ever walk in, the smell is either good or not good, pretty soon the smell disappears. Yep. The neurons are still firing like sledgehammers on a bell, but we become blind and deaf to it because the nervous system likes to habituate the value of that signal when it's there often. And it's only the stuff that comes through signal to noise that kind of jolts us into attention and awareness. And I want to return to attention and awareness, which are prominent themes in the book. And I think it, in an important way, not just, attention and awareness is important, but you also give insight into how to pay better attention, how to pay awareness, with the understanding that people are going to go about it differently. But I do want to ask you about wrestling, because when I was growing up, I lived south of the Cow Palace, and there was some wrestling going on there. I think back then it was WWF. Mm-hmm. There was a short stint in my childhood where I paid attention to, in particular, was it Coco Beware, the guy that had a macaw? I was obsessed with tropical birds. And he would come in and he'd put his tropical bird on the thing. And then who's George the Animal Steel, the guy that would eat the ring.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and
I believe he was a professor. Seriously.
Was he really?
In real life.
Amazing.
He was a professor, but he played George the Animal Steel as a wrestler.
And I loved the movie The Wrestler. The Wrestler.
Darren Aronofsky movie.
It was
Mickey Rourke.
Yeah, one of the reasons I liked it is I once visited Asbury Park. Isn't that where that was filmed? There's a vacant. He goes to visit his daughter. There's a vacant amusement park or abandoned amusement park scene there that was really eerie. Still kind of haunts me a little bit. There's something about the East Coast in kind of fall. All the places that people normally go for just for the summer that we don't have out here on the West Coast. People on the East Coast are just tougher than we are. It still haunts me. Great movie. But I remember watching wrestling, and it was at that age, I think I was probably about 12, 13, maybe 11, 12, 13, where, you're kind of entering puberty. So, and puberty is a fundamental landmark of development. It's the most rapid period of aging. It's also when we start to change our rule set. Like certain people and certain kinds of interactions take on profoundly different meaning, right? It's not just a reproductive competence time and when kids change, their bodies change. The rule book changes fundamentally.
Yeah, our understanding of the world changes in that moment.
Oh yeah, I mean, the moment that a child understands really what sex is and kind of how they got there, and that a lot of the stuff that we see in the world is kind of passively or not so passively being sent through that filter, it's like it's something. It changes the rule book of perception. I view this age from about 11 to 13, at least for me, was a unique transition point where the gap between what I perceived as reality and fiction was kind of blurry. This is captured pretty well in that movie Stand By Me, where they're hanging around the campfire at night and the kid says, "Who do you think would win in a fight between Superman and Mighty Mouse?" And the other kid says, like, "You idiot, like, Mighty Mouse is a cartoon. Of course Superman would win." Right. And like, to me, that's being 11 and a half or 12 years old, where your understanding of reality as you know it is changing, but it's not completely crystallized into an adult form reality.
Yes. That sounds like a really healthy place to be, to me, like that. Not letting it crystallize. I think that's there's where the downfall happens.
So I have questions specifically about wrestling, but it's really about process.
Yeah.
I want to know whether or not you watch wrestling because it allows you to access the energy state in your body and mind, and that kind of mode of thinking in which reality as one conceives it is somewhat blurry. Or is it for a number of other reasons, which is fine? Is that the energy you're trying to export and bring to the creative process elsewhere, to life? Is it that anything is possible, or that we're dealing with archetypes? Because it doesn't matter if it's Coco Beware or Randy Macho Man Savage or George the Animal Steel and the lovely Elizabeth. I guess I did watch a little bit of wrestling. They are archetypes, much like the Greek myths or the Bible, or, no disrespect to the Bible or to Greek myths or to wrestling for that matter. Archetypes are a powerful filter for humans, but we know that they're a very limited filter too, because people aren't built like square wave functions. We have curves and contours and complexity. So what is the deal with your relationship to wrestling?
I think it maintains that kind of playfulness. Anything is possible. We expect the unexpected all the time in wrestling. And it's a way to have a kind of a feeling of the energy of a sport with no competition. It's everyone is working together to put on the best show they can. So it's more like a ballet than it is like a sporting event. And there's great skill involved. It's one of the few things that I can watch and really feel relaxed. It relaxes me. I don't feel like I have to think about it. I can just relax and enjoy it.
This brings up a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, which is this notion of dopamine schedules. I never want to reduce everything to dopamine, but dopamine is the universal currency of delight, pleasure, motivation seeking. There are other chemicals involved too, but there's a beautiful experiment and a couple of examples that I'll use as a foundation to more questions about wrestling and why it's powerful and why other people may want to use wrestling or some other endeavor as a way to access creative energy and source. Earlier, we talked about, you can train an animal to press a lever 3 times and then get reward, and it will learn 3 is the magic number for reward. And then it can switch. It takes a little bit of training and then they can switch, but they can't do prime numbers. They can't do high abstraction schedules. Humans either. We're not very good at figuring out the rule set for optimal foraging. We do it well enough to persist as a species, at least for now, but it's very likely that we are not tapping into that system as well as we could. And how would we know if we don't know? It's one of those, you don't know what you don't know. There's a beautiful experiment that explored when dopamine is released in the context of watching sport or watching comedy, believe it or not. And with the comedy stuff, it was every time there was a surprise. It was kind of that jarring, like, ha, and they'd measure people's dopamine output. They were also brain imaging. In a game of basketball, it's a beautiful opportunity experimentally because every time one team gets the ball or shooting free throws or something, they're going down court and it's either going to end up in the basket or it's not. Might end up on the free throw line, but it's end up or not. So what they found is that the schedule of anticipation was every time there was a switch of which team got it. So you're waiting, and then it's, you're waiting, yes, waiting, 3-pointer, awesome. And if something happened where it looked like they were going to make the 3-pointer, but then somebody basically swatted the ball away and then went for a half-court shot, like you don't expect that very often, bigger dopamine release. Okay, so that's kind of how the dopamine thing works. When you describe wrestling, I wonder, because you don't know the script, it's not one team gets it, then the other team gets it. You don't know who's going to win. Anything could happen is what you said.
Yes.
The availability of that dopamine surge or drip, which is a powerful thing, is completely out of your reach in terms of anticipation. You don't know when it's going to come, but it must arrive often enough that you return to it 11 hours a week of watching. In many ways, the way I'm starting to conceptualize the creative process is a little bit the same. You don't know where those nuggets of gold and those loose threads are, but you have enough experience, and in this case, I am referring to you specifically, to know that they are in there. The people walking in this room have a certain level of ability and talent to create that. The map will form itself as we are going through the voyage. And those nuggets of, here I'm calling them dopamine, but they are out there. And that knowledge is enough to get you to come back again and again, to trust the process. Mm-hmm. So I actually think the way you describe wrestling as, it's the energy of the sport. It's not the whether or not it's this move or that move or who wins or who loses. It's the energy. And I'm guessing it's the energy that it creates in you as an observer.
Yes. It's the energy it creates in me and the reality that it's honest in what it is in a world where seemingly nothing is honest at what it is. And again, not because people are lying all the time. We have a little data, we make up a story to explain it, and then we say that's what happened. And we have trusted sources who do exactly what I just described and who pass this down as gospel of what we teach. And maybe it's true and maybe it's not. With wrestling, we know maybe it's true, maybe it's not. We lean towards it not being true. But what's really interesting about wrestling, and maybe one of the most fun things about it, is that sometimes real life works its way into the story. Like 2 wrestlers get married. Now,
in real life.
Well, we don't know. It's like that. You never know. It's like in the storyline, they're getting married or getting divorced or best friends turn on each other. And it could be part of the story And it could really be happening because they do, right? Someone breaks their leg. So they're out because their leg is broken. Did they break their leg? We don't know. They're out. Do you know what I'm saying? We're told they broke their leg. So there's always this like, I wonder what's true. You know, I wonder where the line is. We know that it's scripted or predetermined. That's how they say it's predetermined. But we don't know where reality is and isn't. And in some ways, that's our real experience of the world, is this, we don't really know where reality is and isn't. We have an idea, maybe. I think in some ways wrestling's more honest or legitimate because we start with the idea that it's fixed. When we go to a boxing match, we don't go to a boxing match thinking it's fixed, yet it might be. And historically, it's happened, you know, or there was just something in baseball where, was it baseball?
I don't follow baseball. I should know.
There was just a big sports. One of the teams that
plays basically.
Yes.
Was it the call signals of the catcher?
Yes.
Yeah. That they were. You're not supposed to deprogram or deconstruct the call signals of the other team, and I guess maybe a team got caught doing that.
Yes, and the team that won whatever the World Series was. So it's like with wrestling, you know, that wouldn't be a scandal. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like
because almost anything goes.
Anything goes, and that's what the world is really like. So in some ways, it's comforting. And there's still this mystery of like, wow, I wonder if that's true or not, because we never really know. Someone gets hurt. Did they really break their back? Or are they just going on vacation? We don't know. We'll never know. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating. And I feel like there are certain people who show up in a way that is surprising in not just one direction, but in all directions. Like it's one thing for a celebrity to come out and make a statement. That can be interesting or not interesting, depending on the celebrity and the statement and the delivery. And I'm probably going to get this wrong because I'm terrible at pop culture things, most of them anyway. But as I recall, Lady Gaga showed up to some event wearing an outfit made of meat. And I can't tell you for the life of me whether or not that was a statement against meat or for meat. Maybe it was a statement for the carnivore diet. Maybe it was a statement for veganism. I don't know.
Yeah,
Either way.
Or maybe neither.
Or maybe neither. But it was definitely a statement in that it broke with the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And it said to me, okay, she creates different rules for herself, or sort of breaks boundaries that other people had. I never heard of anyone doing that before. Which doesn't mean they hadn't, but I never heard of anyone doing it before. But we do tend to associate, outside the current playbook with quote unquote creativity, unless it crosses a line, in which case it becomes something else. It becomes almost theater for sake of theater. But what you're telling me is that within the realm of wrestling, theater is the goal at some level. And everybody knows it who goes into those arenas, who watches it.
Yes.
Everybody.
Yes.
And everyone agrees to kind of suspend outside reality and say, this is reality.
Yes. And they boo for the bad guys and cheer for the good guys, knowing that backstage they're probably friends.
Except for the kids that are 11 who think it's really real.
I don't know. I don't even know if they know. I'm not sure.
Having health insurance is important. So, if you or anyone in your family has Medicaid or CHIP, listen up. Check your mail for a renewal form from your state. Complete the form and mail it back right away so you don't lose your coverage. If you do lose Medicaid or CHIP, visit healthcare.gov to see if you're eligible to enroll in a low-cost, quality health plan. Keep your family covered. Paid for by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
The only other person I know who has vocalized their love of professional wrestling to the extent that you have is Lars Frederiksen, the rhythm guitar player for Rancid, who loves wrestling. But his statement, and forgive me, Lars, if I'm getting this wrong, is that because he grew up in an area of the South Bay where there were no teams. Like now there's the San Jose Earthquakes, but there was no football team in San Jose. He's from Campbell, but there were no good teams, no sports teams, but they had wrestling. And he had it where? on the television set. And so if you didn't have like I didn't grow up with any organized sports thing. The 49ers were up the road, but for me it was skateboarding. And I love it for the same reason. You actually never really know what's going to happen. There is no rule book. The rule book is made up. But they are very, it's a unique sport in that surfing's a bit like this too, in that they are absolutely maniacal about making things look a certain way. It's not about just doing it. It's about doing it and making it look good.
Yeah.
Smooth, catching it with the front foot, and the trends change. Style.
It's a style.
Style is, style is this like nebulous thing of like, in fashion or in sport. Right. Yeah. Whereas with a football, there's some amazing catches. There's even like the catch, which I happen to know is a 49er, the catch during the Super Bowl. But in general, it's like the goal is get in the end zone, win the game. And I'm sure football players are like cringing as I say this, but it doesn't matter if you run ugly, if you run fastest. In skateboarding, that would never fly. In fact, you'll basically be ridiculed out of the sport. In wrestling, is it the same? Is there style to wrestling?
It's all performance. It's all the charisma of the people involved. There's the physical ability, the ability to talk and tell a story, and the how charismatic the performers are. Whether you want to watch them, whether you want to see them win, whether you want to see them lose, and whether you're interested in cheering or booing for them.
I was going to say it reminds me of opera, but operas get released over and over again. You know the story and how it ends when you walk in if you've listened to it before. So wrestling does seem to be unique in that way. It's real-time iteration, at least from the perspective of the
and it's real-time iteration based on, because people get hurt all the time. They're doing really crazy physical stuff. So if someone gets hurt, the story has to change, because in real life they can't show up next week and do what was planned in the script. So it's very alive, and there's a lot of something interesting and unexpected is always happening.
Well, in a much more calm form, I'll share with you something. I just like your perspective on it. For years, I used a tool in order to try and access ideas since I was a little kid, actually, because I have a little bit of OCD, a little bit of a Tourette's. When I get tired, I'll do that. I'm like very strategy implementation oriented. I had to, when I was a little kid, I needed all my stuffed animals arranged in a certain way. Legos had to be, a little neurotic, or a lot. And then science is very much about, you have to do things with a lot of precision. And I discovered that the ultimate reset for me when I was in graduate school or a postdoc, if I couldn't make it to a really good, like Agnostic Front show, or like chaos, like the chaos of a punk rock show for me was kind of this reset. It was like, could like release all this thing, and I got energy from it. First time I saw Transplants play, and it's like, wow, because you don't know what's going to happen. And it was scary, and I loved it. The other thing that I used over time to kind of reset this ability to think in a structured way without it feeling like it was overcoming me, maybe even access the same thing in some ways that you're accessing with wrestling, was I like to stare at aquaria. Like I like to go to aquariums, or I'd build aquariums, and I would just sit there, because you never know which way the fish are going to go. You think it's going that way, but then all of a sudden they'll turn and go the other way. It's completely unpredictable. And I love aquaria because of the tranquility, and had them in my lab for a long time. I just adore aquariums because of the non-linearity of it. It's not A, B, C, it's A, Z, Z, Q, And I think this is what some people try and access through psychedelics, but that didn't seem to me like a very good way to do it on a regular basis. Whereas with aquaria, the tanks are there. So in your book, you talk about something that I also share a love for, which is how the ocean and aspects of nature like clouds and ocean, they have a predictability to them. We know where they are and where to find them. Fortunately, the sun rises and sets every day, at least for now. And we can count on them with 100% reliability. And yet they are, from the perspective of like what physicists would say, they're very chaotic. You can't look at a wave and know exactly how the foam is going to roll out. It's going to roll in and roll out. We have the tides. But when I hear about wrestling, I think about my love of aquaria. When I think about my love of punk rock music, for instance, or I think about the ocean, I think of it in that way, that we actually have a need to source from things that have both a combination of structure and no structure.
I think it's interesting that there are some places that don't change and some places that change a lot. And I can remember thinking about this. I was walking, there's a beach that I walk on in Hawaii that I walk on every morning when I'm there. And if you walk on the same beach every day, you kind of get a sense of what it's like. And I remember I was in Hawaii, walked on the beach every day for a year, however long it was. And then I left for 6 months and I came back. And the next time I walked on the beach, it was an entirely different beach, entirely different. And I remember thinking in that moment, it's like, this is an unusual place, because I pictured the house that I didn't even grow up in. The house I lived in maybe for the first 7 years of my life. And I think about what the backyard looked like. And I think about a particular old tree that was there. And I don't know this for sure, but my sense is if I were to go back to where I grew up and go to that place and look in that yard, it would probably look pretty similar. Yet here was this beach that I was walking on in Hawaii that in the course of 6 months completely changed its face. And just how interesting both of those things are. And that depending on the project we're working on, to be able to go to a place that we know has the potential to change a lot, and what that would do to our connection with the earth when we're experiencing that, versus going to a place that has very little change, and you can kind of count on it being the way it's always been. That both of those are interesting things to be able to draw upon, depending on what we want to open in our psyche.
I have an almost unhealthy fascination with New York in the mid 80s and 90s. And
you didn't live there though.
No, but since I was a kid, I went there when I was a little kid and I was fascinated by it. There's also a very interesting migration of East Coast to West Coast creatives, including yourself, that played an important part of my life, just seeing things and hearing things that were meaningful to me. But for instance, I love the movie. I haven't seen the documentary, but the one about Jean-Michel Basquiat, because of the characters that are in it and the huge number of people in that, like Parker Posey, Dennis Hopper, and Christopher Walken, and on and on. Those images of New York at that time are so exciting, and what was happening. I wish I could transplant myself to that. If I had a time machine, that's where I'd land first. I hear a lot of people say, New York isn't what it used to be. San Francisco isn't what it used to be. Whatever. LA isn't what. There does seem to be something that feels a little bit disruptive to people about cities changing. But the idea that natural landscapes change is actually, we even accept like, hey, fires sweep through places, and assuming they weren't started by humans, we accept that change and the reordering of landscapes is normal and healthy. And I always tell myself, the kids growing up in New York or San Francisco or Chicago now, they only know it that way. So to them, it's as cool or as uncool as it's ever going to be.
Yeah.
Right. They either want to get out or they're loving every piece of it. Mm-hmm. And this happened for all the people that came before us. So my question is a very basic one. Do you miss the New York that you came up in? Are you somebody who is attached to the past?
I'm not attached at all. I'm not attached to anything in the past. I don't look back at all.
You don't think about like, oh, in my dorm room at NYU, Beastie Boys, this, like I miss. No, your optics are forward. Present and forward.
Only present and forward.
Is there a process to that, or it just happens to be where you default to?
I don't know. I'm not sure, but that's how I do it.
Nostalgia is not in Rick Rubin's brain.
No.
Oh, lucky you, man.
No.
I say that with genuine like admiration. So you can hear a song that maybe you had a role in producing or not, something from the past, and you're accessing a state, presumably, but you're not pining for or wishing how it was.
Never.
I'm no psychologist, but I'm going to venture to say that I think that's a very unique quality. I think a lot of people wish for or wish that things did not happen the way they did, that there's a lot of living in the past. There's a lot of this notion of like people future trip.
Yeah.
I don't actually think that's the default state of the brain. I think a lot of people live in emotional anchors to the past, good and bad.
Yeah. I have none.
And watching wrestling is one way that you cleanse the palate.
Yeah.
Like when you go to a meal and they pass around this, that don't really do this anymore, but pass around a little bit of sorbet to cleanse the palate. Turns out there's a biological reason for that. There's a kind of neutralization of the taste receptors between savory and sweet, etc. So if wrestling is your a palate neutralizer.
I know that if I watch wrestling before I go to sleep, it's going to be a good night's sleep.
Do you dream about wrestling?
No, never.
Speaking,
but it's just relaxing. It's just relaxing.
Do you anticipate when you watch it? Like, here comes the dopamine hit.
Sometimes when it happens,
he's going
like,
up for the three-pointer.
Yeah, sometimes it's exciting.
But do you enjoy?
But even then, it's like the stakes are low. It's like I don't really care what happens, which feels good. You know that I'm just being entertained.
Do they actually get hurt? Sometimes you said they do.
A lot. Yeah. Often. They're basically stuntmen. So imagine stuntman getting hurt doing a crazy stunt. Happens all the time.
Well, in the movie The Wrestler, I remember he got staples stapled into him, and I thought, that's pretty intense. I once went and saw, I guess they called it Mexican wrestling. I don't know if they call it that anymore, where the guys dipped their hands. Yeah, they dipped their hands in glass. This was in Sacramento, and I went and saw it, and I honestly didn't have a stomach for it. I really didn't. Yeah. I couldn't believe it was legal. It might not have been legal.
Yeah.
But I thought...
There's crazy stuff in wrestling sometimes.
Wow. So before sleep, is that typically when you watch wrestling?
Yes.
Do you think it's useful for people to have some activity that allows them to kind of clear their mind and create peace before heading off to sleep?
I think so. And I think yoga nidras would be a good, it's like yoga nidra, pro wrestling, any of the...
Yeah.
Any of those type things.
Yeah, not watching the Dahmer thing. I won't watch that.
I don't watch any horror, anything, or I don't like violent things.
Yeah. I know it exists. I know horrible things happen in the world, but I certainly don't want to do that before sleep. I think these liminal states before and emerging from sleep are very powerful. When you wake up in the morning, are your thoughts immediately structured, or do you enjoy the kind of clearing of the clouds?
It's a slow process for me to wake up, and I like that. I like not engaging too much too soon. I also I usually fall asleep listening to a lecture or something speaking, because if I don't, I can get caught in my own thoughts, and listening to something is enough of a focus point that it stops me from talking to myself.
Yeah, I do the same. My grandfather listened to the radio, to sports on the radio, and he would fall asleep. Oftentimes, he was a smoker with a cigarette in his mouth. His wife's responsibility was to stay up later than he did and make sure he didn't burn everything down. And then when you wake up, you said it's a slow process. Is it an hour or two before you feel like you're...
I would say probably an hour. I usually wake up and try to get in the sun as soon as I possibly can, and hope to spend about an hour, and then I'll usually go for a walk on the beach for another hour or 90 minutes, depending.
Are you with family members and other people at that time?
I'm usually focused by myself.
Phone?
I'll be listening to something. I don't look at the phone, but I listen. I listen to, again, a lecture, or podcast, or audiobook. I like audiobooks a lot.
Yeah, I do too. If an idea comes to mind, do you write it down?
I may. It depends. I like to. I usually would do a note in my phone. I don't usually carry pen and paper with me when I'm walking.
Yeah, I do the same. I do a long Sunday hike or jog, and I will audio script into my phone. People sometimes give me funny looks because I'm talking to myself, and
that's a nice way to do it, though. I'd like to learn more of the audio methods of doing it instead of the typing methods. Right now, I type, and I don't think it's the best way.
The voice memos function in the iPhone and other phones is really good, and they're now companies like Rev.com that will turn those into Word doc scripts that are fairly well corrected, fairly inexpensive. No, they're not a sponsor of the podcast. I just happen to use it. It's great. I actually learned that trick from Richard Axel. the Nicorette chewing wild man Nobel Prize winner. He writes manuscripts, and by walking around his office, pacing and talking into his phone.
I always think of the Woody Allen movie where the Alan Alda character is, talking about, he's speaking comedy ideas into the phone. It's really pretentious.
I liked that movie about Harvey Milk, that Sean Penn played Harvey Milk, because that all took place before I was alive, mostly in the Bay Area. But there's these beautiful scenes of him, as I recall, sitting there at his kitchen table talking into a tape recorder at night, talking about how he predicted that he would be possibly assassinated, et cetera. And this goes back to the Strummer thing about writing things down. I think that a lot of people, including myself, feel a little bit of like egotistical guilt around like, who am I to think that my ideas could be worthwhile or something? But, I think over time I've come to realize that the ideas about experiments or health questions I have about health, or they don't always, but oftentimes can lead to real, seeds that grow into big trees.
But it's something that's interesting to you. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks, most of my notes are not for anyone else's, for anyone else's use. Like I hear about something that's interesting to me and I think about, okay, I want to learn more about this, whatever it is. And then sometimes those things work their way into things I'm doing because the universe seems to work in that way. But I rarely am learning something with the idea of using it. I learn things with the idea of, this is what I want to know. This is what's interesting to me. And then often those things that are interesting to me can find their way into other projects just because they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like coal or kindling, but the moment that you think of it that way, it sounds so extractive, right? But you take this walk and you're writing down the occasional idea, perhaps, and then what is the next sort of the way that here are less than do this, then this, then that. I'm interested in, like, where does your mind shift to? Does it become more structured as the day goes on? Does your thinking become more structured around projects and plans?
I try to deal with things that need dealing with after that, and in preparation for going to work. And then when I go to work, it's more like this free thing where I'm, again, hoping something good comes, welcoming something good, paying attention, and maybe trying to will it to happen, but never, but knowing I don't have the ability to make it happen. I can just be present for it and be ready if it does arrive.
Some of the more surprising and I found really interesting and useful features of the book were about sort of dancing with structure and lack of structure. So when I think of structure, I think of like deadlines. So when you are in the process of creating something, obviously deadlines are relevant, time of day, right? There's only so many hours in the day where one can stay in the groove or in this like readiness to receive. Have you ever found yourself in that mode where you're kind of grinding, like here we are, like, okay, I'm not coming home for dinner tonight. It's the next, we're going to push. We're like, put on the coffee pot kind of thing.
A lot over the course of my life, a lot, not as much now. And one of the things that I discovered through working on the book was the phases of work. We're not required to treat the different phases of work in the same way. Whereas before, I did. Before, everything was in this state of play. Everything had a wide open time schedule. It happens when it happens. And if it takes 2 years or 3 years, it doesn't matter. It's not about that. It's only about this thing has to be great. And what I came to realize in working on the book is that there are different phases. And the first phase is this seed collecting phase, which is kind of an ongoing part of life in general. I do that always, whether I'm working on something or not. I'm always in the seed collecting phase, and there's no deadline or just anything that interests me that I think I want to learn more about or has potential to be something I hear something, think, I'd like to read more about that, or I wonder if there's a movie about that. Is there a movie about that? If not, maybe there's a movie to be made. Again, this is something I want in my life. Let's see if it exists. If it doesn't exist, then maybe that's something interesting to pursue. But I know that the desire is there because I have it. So in the seed phase, there's no deadlines. It's just a wide open part. And then the next phase is called the experimentation phase, where you start experimenting to see what the seeds want to do. You're involved, but you're more of you're not really dictating the action. You're setting the stage for something to happen, but it's not about you yet. So it'd be like the equivalent of you'd plant the seed, you would water it, you would make sure it was in the sun, and you'd wait. So you're involved, but you can't make it grow, And then when it sprouts and it grows, or if it turns into a plant, then you can look at the plants like, okay, how does this plant, what's the potential of this plant? And then that the third phase is the crafting phase, where it's like, okay, I have this plant, maybe I'm going to trim it, or maybe I'm going to combine it with these other plants to make something else with it. Now it's like material that you have. And then finally is the completion or finishing phase, which is the final edit, getting to the version of it, the version of it that's the one that you can share with the world if that's something you're going to do. And I've come to realize that by the time you're going into the completion phase, you can have a deadline, and it won't hurt the project. In fact, it might help the project. And I didn't know that before. So I've worked on projects that have gone longer than they necessarily needed to, and maybe not in the best interest of the project, because I didn't know that. I didn't understand that the timing of that, because I am so aware of the necessity in the experimental phase to not have a deadline, that I assumed that held through the whole project. And it's not a clear phase one finishes and then you start phase two finishes and then you start phase three. You move back and forth between them. I'm collecting seeds all the time. I'm always in phase one. And then probably to some degree, there's always some version of experimentation going on. Maybe not now, but if something's on a list of things I want to look at, hopefully I'll get to the list and give them some experimentation and see what they can turn into. And then if they do turn into something, then they get to the crafting phase, where it's more, okay, now I have this thing. What do I know about this kind of thing? What can I match this with? What can I use this for? How can I be involved as a craftsman? And by the end of the crafting phase, or deep into the crafting phase, you can start seeing the end. You can start seeing an end, and then you can even dictate an end. But I recommend, if you do, just dictate it for you, not for anyone else, because if something comes up where you learn, if you set a deadline, a public deadline, and then a new discovery happens along the way and you realize, oh, this could actually be much better than I thought, but I need more time, it's harder to do that if you set the deadline. So I would say have an internal deadline to finish it. That said, if an unusual situation comes up and it's better for everything not to meet that deadline, it's one of those rules that you set the rule to break it if it's what's best for the project. But that was a new thing for me, and it helped me a lot.
When did you realize that?
In collecting the material for the book and thinking about it, when I realized that it was phases, I didn't know any of this. When I started writing the book, I didn't know hardly any of the things in the book. They're more, most of it would be reverse engineering something that I had a successful experience using these methods without knowing they were methods. Just following my instincts got me to something good. And then I would look back at, why did I want to do that? And is there a principle at play that could be of use outside of this case? And how do I explain that? And that's what the book is these reverse engineered principles that have led to good decision making and trying to make things.
The chapter on self-doubt was really interesting to me.
Tell me what it says, because I can't remember.
Well, I'll read the first sentence of it, which is that self-doubt lives in all of us. And while we may wish it was gone, it is there to serve us. And it goes on to describe how to dance with self-doubt in not so many words. I think, there's a saying that is actually from the landscape of psychology, which is generally discussed in a kind of pathological context, which is if nothing matters, anything goes. This is usually the phrase used to describe people who feel as if like there's no use in living, so just go crazy, often to self-destruct. But there's
As an entrepreneur, as a creator, I'm 24/7 on the go all the time.
It sounds like you got hypnotized to believe that to be successful.
Correct.
And you actually believe that's the reason why you're successful.
Look, you could put together any case against why I'm fabricating it or why, it was just happened to be timing, whatever it may be. And there's a lot of forces at play there, right? You hit bottom, you lost belief, you went to this, it redirected you. You had an entirely new mission and guide in life. But what is absolute truth is from that moment on, I just have been on a trajectory.
You skyrocketed.
That went from going to the top of skateboarding to writing a concept for the DC video that led to a television show that led to multiple television shows that then led to, creating a professional skateboarding league and cartoons, and then ultimately a business that creates businesses and making hundreds of millions of dollars.
I am so excited to have my guest here today. We have Rob Dyrdek, and I've never been speechless, but this guy is above and beyond probably any guest we've ever had on Habits and Hustle. You may think of him as a skateboarder. You may know him from Ridiculousness or Rob and Big or Fantasy Factory, but this guy is one of the most clever entrepreneurs. What he's built, what he's done, how he's automated his life and designed a life that is way beyond anybody's imagination. You can't even imagine. I am so happy to have you here. Thank you for being here.
No, thank you for having me.
I don't mean to make you blush. I don't even know what direction to go with you, because when I told you when you walked in, when I delved deeper and deeper into who you are and what you've accomplished, forget about the TV, you and the world records and all of that. This podcast could be 11 hours, honestly. I don't know what direction to go first.
Yeah, and I think that ends up being a lot of the problem with sort of my past sort of reason of not doing press. For many years, I didn't even, as I built the Dyrdek machine and built sort of this entirely new vision for myself and sort of life and legacy, I didn't talk to anybody. And so by the time I began to share it, it was deeply refined, and I had lived it and accomplished so much inside the way of thinking that now it's the only thing everybody wants to talk about. And that's how I control the narrative that has led to sort of me connecting with a lot of different people that think this way, to be able to have this conversation in a more intelligent, connected way to who you are and what your brand is, than just asking me, what'd you do to become a pro skater?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But it's like you've conquered so many different areas, right? Mm-hmm. So obviously it's like that's the through line, right? So it wasn't just in skating. You've conquered you're a serial entrepreneur and you've made hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in many businesses. can you first start with like what is the Deerdick machine? Let's start with the basics, and then we'll kind of move on from there.
Well, the Deerdick Machine is a venture creation studio, which is essentially a business that creates businesses. And, as you know, a business is a living thing. And to me, I call it systematically fusing art, science, and magic, right? Because you've got to be the creator and the visionary for the idea that you have, but there are proven principles and certain inalienable things that have to happen for a business to be successful. That's the science side. And then you got to get lucky, right market, right timing, like something happens to go your way and some magical moment happens to create a successful business. And in my case, I measure the success of that business through the entire cycle from idea all the way to exit.
So can you just walk us through the evolution of you? Because you've evolved over and grown so much from when you were you started when you were 16 as you're a pro when you a skateboarder at 16. So you're from Ohio, right? How did that even start? Like, how did you to become even like the best? Like, how did you come from Ohio to LA and even begin that whole journey?
Yeah, it's a weird place to grow up and become like known in skateboarding, but believe it or not, Dayton, Ohio, where I grew up, was the epicenter for the skate culture outside of California. And that was because a young serial entrepreneur by the name of Jimmy George created like a skate distribution center there and would throw these big skate contests there. And when I was 11 years old, I called the skate shop because they had a ramp in the back and I had never skated a ramp before. And I asked him, the owner, would you allow me to skate for free if I get 10 people to come and pay to skate? And he was like, what? You can just come down here. And then when I skated the ramp for the first time, he was like, wow, like, you've got real potential. Like if you skated, that's the first time you've ever skated a ramp. You have real potential. And I didn't even know what the word meant. And my parents are trying to explain to me like, oh, like you could be really good at it. But he was a serial entrepreneur. And then I just watched him start company after company, and everybody, as I was getting better and better at becoming a skateboarder, everybody was building companies around me. So I quit high school, became a professional skateboarder, and started my first company right after I moved to California when I was 17.
But when you said is interesting, like when you were a little kid, like a teenager, you said to this guy, let me go and skate.
I was 11.
11 years old.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I'll bring 10 people. They'll pay. Like you obviously had something already very entrepreneurial, like a spirit within you to even think of that at 11. But how did you even think of that?
Think about this though. Imagine if he would have been, don't be ridiculous. Why are you calling and asking? If you don't have the money, you can't skate.
Right.
Imagine how much of a difference that would have built, like by them saying, you don't even worry about it. Come on down. We'll let it do for free. That opened this like belief of like, oh, wow, look what happened. You took a shot and it worked, right? It's like, I like to say that I had these series of events when I was really young. I became really good at soccer. Like I became really good at skateboarding as soon as I tried to do it. I made a cold call, then didn't just skate. I was recognized of like, you have true talent, and was validated even further that I had this possibility to become a professional. Like, so I had this extraordinary foundation of self-belief that the world turned my way in a handful of different things at that very impressionable age that allowed me to begin an evolution of continually growing that belief and taking bigger and bigger shots.
So, but that's interesting because it sounds to me that things came easy for you. You're you were a naturally gifted athlete. If you were really good, you were extraordinary at soccer and at skateboarding. I mean, like you said, it gave you that self-belief. But what was there anything that you had to work at that you weren't good at, that kind of, you didn't have the self-belief, or because you had that self-belief from those things, it gave you the self-belief that you can figure it out on something else?
Well, I continued to just evolve and grow and continue to find success. And I didn't truly lose like self-belief for the first time till I was like 25. And like, if you can imagine, you're born into belief, you've had all the success, and then like in your mid 20s, this super dangerous time when you're really trying to figure it out, like that's when you lose your self-belief. And if you can imagine, you're so used to having it for so long,
Right.
trying to manage it was this entirely different and foreign experience, because you don't just lose it overnight. You as you begin to lose clarity on where you want to go, and then you begin trying different things and they don't work, and now you lose your way and are unsure of what you should do. That's where you begin to begin to build doubt, which then ultimately can lead to losing belief.
Yeah, absolutely. What happened when you were 25?
You know, I had evolved up into, going from professional skateboarder and traveling the world to then having a signature board, then signature shoes, and all of these, now having money, right? I was making a few $100,000 a year, but then I just wasn't satisfied with being a professional skateboarder. My desire, I started a record label and a skate shop, all these businesses that I didn't know how to run that were all failing. And so now it's like my skating is just getting worse and worse because I'm trying to be a business guy, because I'm an entrepreneur. I started my first company at 17. Like,
What
I got
company
to
was
start.
that, by the way, at 17?
17 was called Orion Trucks. It was basically the metal part of the skateboard. I was reading a book called The Orion Prophecy about the pyramids being directed at the Orion stars, and there's aliens living there. So I named the company Orion Aluminum, and I hand drew the logo and everything. It was the first pure brand design and build, put together the entire team, found the manufacturer to put the whole thing together. It was a true like founder build at 17,
And what happened with it? Did you make money
It's
off
actually
that
still
company?
in business to this day, but no, I did that deal, put together basically.
And you were 17.
Yeah, like the all-star team, the best skaters in the world, designed the entire thing, put the whole thing together for 0.5% of sales. So